She rode 2,000 miles to marry a poor cattle farmer. When the gates opened and she saw what he really owned, she nearly turned the wagon around and drove back into the dark. A ranch the size of a county, riders with rifles on the ridges, a house that looked like it had swallowed half the timber in Wyoming. And the man who'd been writing her sweet, beat-down letters about hard work and honest dirt was standing on the porch wearing boots worth more than her father's coffin. If you want to know what she did next, stay with me till the end. Hit that like and drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. The stagecoach driver wouldn't take her the last 6 miles. He pulled up at a crossroads where 2 rutted tracks split a sea of yellow grass, set the brake, and climbed down without a word. Evelyn Mercer watched him from inside the coach with her gloved hands folded over the cracked leather valise that held everything she owned. A blue wool dress, 2 shirtwaists gone gray from too many washings, her mother's wedding ring sewn into the lining, and a packet of 17 letters tied with a piece of butcher's twine. The driver opened the door. Dust came in with him, fine as flour. "This is as far as I go, ma'am." "You said Grayson Land." "Grayson Land starts a mile back that way." He pointed with his chin, not his hand. "But the house is 6 miles north, maybe 7. I don't carry passengers onto private holdings. Company rule." "Then how am I supposed to get there?" He looked at her like she'd asked him how the sun worked. "Somebody's coming for you. That was the arrangement." "How do you know?" Because nobody gets off at this crossroads unless somebody's coming for them. Otherwise they die out here. Easy as falling asleep." He didn't say it cruel. He said it the way a man tells you the price of flour. Evelyn climbed down because there was nothing else to do, and the heat hit her like an open oven door. She'd thought Philadelphia in August was hot. She'd been wrong about a lot of things lately, and that was just the latest. The driver pulled her trunk off the back and set it in the dirt. It was a small trunk, almost embarrassing. He looked at it, then at her, and something in his face softened for the first time since Cheyenne. "You got water?" "Some." "Drink it. Don't save it. They'll be here before sundown or they won't be here, and either way the water won't matter much after that." "Thank you." "Ma'am." He touched the brim of his hat, climbed back up, and was gone in a curtain of grit before she'd finished smoothing her skirt. Then it was quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't really quiet, because the wind keeps talking and the grass keeps answering, and somewhere a long way off, a bird made a noise like a rusty hinge. Evelyn sat down on her trunk. She did not cry. She had used up her crying in a boarding house room in Philadelphia 11 weeks ago, sitting on a bed she could no longer pay for, with a creditor's note on the floor, and her father 2 weeks in the ground beside her mother. She'd cried until her face felt scraped from the inside. She didn't have any left. She took the letters out of the valise. She'd read them so many times the paper had gone soft as cloth at the folds. The first one was 4 lines long, just an answer to her advertisement, which she had placed because a woman at the lodging house had told her women out west could start clean if they were willing to marry strangers. "Miss Mercer, I saw your notice in the matrimonial. I run cattle in Wyoming territory. I won't lie about what I have, which isn't much. I have land and I have work, and I'm willing to share both with a woman who won't expect a fine life. If that suits you, write back. Caleb Grayson." She had written back the same day. She'd been honest too. She'd told him she was 28 and her family was gone, and she had nothing to bring except her 2 hands and a steady disposition, and that she did not expect to be loved but would like eventually to be respected. His next letter had been longer. He'd written about cold winters and rough men and a small house that needed a woman's touch, but mostly needed someone who wouldn't run when the wolves got close. He'd written that he was 34 years old and not handsome, and that he had a quiet way about him that some people mistook for unfriendliness. He had asked her very plainly not to come if she wanted comfort. She had come anyway. The sun moved a hand's width across the sky. Evelyn drank some of her water. She put the letters back. She watched the road. She was thinking about her father when she heard the riders. There were 3 of them, coming from the north on big, dark horses that ate the ground in long, easy strides. Even from a quarter-mile out, she could tell they weren't hurrying, which somehow felt worse than if they had been. They rode like men who already owned the place they were riding through. The one in front pulled up about 10 feet from her. He didn't dismount. He was a tall man under a hat that had seen weather. His face was wind-burned across the cheekbones and his jaw needed a shave, and his eyes were the color of a creek in shadow. Not blue exactly, more gray, with something tired sitting at the back of them. He was not handsome. He had told the truth about that. But he wasn't ugly either. He was the kind of man you'd look at twice without knowing why. Miss Mercer. Mr. Grayson? You been waiting long? A while. Sorry about that. We had a steer down in the south pasture. He swung off the horse then, and she saw he was taller than she'd expected and broader in the shoulder. He came over and looked at her trunk like it was a problem he was trying to solve politely. That all of it? That's all of it. He nodded, once, like the answer pleased him in some way she couldn't read. Then he picked up the trunk one-handed and walked it to one of the other horses, where one of the riders, a younger man with a long, sunburnt neck, was already shaking out a length of rope to tie it on. "Ma'am," the young rider said, touching his hat. He had a face like a kid who'd been told to behave at church and was working hard at it. "This is Henry," Caleb said, "and Sam back there." He nodded at the third rider, an older man with a mustache going white and the kind of squint that suggested he'd been looking at sunbright country for 40 years. Sam touched his hat too, but said nothing. "You all ride out together to meet stagecoaches?" Evelyn said. She heard the edge in her own voice and didn't care. The driver had spooked her. The empty road had spooked her. The sheer flat strangeness of this country, where you could see for 50 miles in every direction and there was still nothing in any of them, had spooked her. Caleb looked at her for a moment. "No, ma'am," he said. "But the country between here and the house has wolves and worse, and I don't bring a woman across it with one rifle when I can bring 3. That shut her up. He went to a fourth horse she hadn't noticed at first, a smaller, gentler-looking sorrel mare tied to Henry's saddle by a lead. He brought it forward and stood holding the reins. "You ride?" "I've ridden. Not for some years." "This one's quiet. She'll follow mine if you let her. Henry'll come up on your offside. You won't have to do much but stay in the saddle. I don't have a riding habit. Won't matter out here. Nobody'll see you but us, and we won't say anything about it." He said it with no particular kindness and no particular roughness either, just a fact dropped in the dirt between them. Evelyn looked at the horse. She looked at the sky, which had started to take on a deep, brassy color along the western edge. She looked back at the man she had crossed 2,000 miles to marry, and she could not for the life of her tell anything about him from his face. "All right," she said. He helped her into the saddle. His hands were careful in a way that didn't match the rest of him. Hard hands, calloused across the palms, but they took her elbow and her foot the way you'd handle something you were afraid to break. He didn't look at her while he was doing it. He looked at the cinch, at the stirrup, at the horse's ear. Like meeting her eyes would have cost him something he wasn't ready to spend. Then he swung up onto his own horse and clicked his tongue, and they started north. For a long time, nobody talked. The country opened up the way country does in Wyoming, in slow, vast steps, each rise revealing more of itself until you stopped believing in towns at all. Evelyn kept her hands tight on the saddle horn and her back as straight as she could manage, and tried not to look like a woman who'd grown up on cobblestones. The mare was as gentle as he'd said. After a mile, she stopped flinching every time the wind moved the grass. Caleb rode a little ahead. He didn't look back at her, but every so often she'd see him tilt his head, just slightly, like he was listening for whether she was still there. Henry rode at her right shoulder, close enough to grab her if the horse spooked, but far enough not to crowd. Sam stayed at the rear with the rifle across his lap. After maybe 2 miles, Henry cleared his throat. "Ma'am?" "Yes?" "How was the ride out? From back east, I mean." "Long," Evelyn said. 3 trains, 2 stagecoaches. The last stagecoach broke an axle in Nebraska, and we sat for a day and a half in a place called Ogallala, which I would not recommend. "No, ma'am. Nobody recommends Ogallala." He said it so seriously she almost laughed. She didn't, because she wasn't sure she still knew how, but she came close. "You from out here, Henry?" "Born in Missouri. Come out when I was 15. Been with Mr. Grayson going on 4 years. "You like it?" He thought about that, which she appreciated. Men who answered too fast usually weren't telling you anything. "Most days," he said. "What about the other days?" He glanced at her sideways. He had a quick, freckled face, and there was a piece of straw caught in the brim of his hat that he hadn't noticed. "Winter," he said. "Winter ain't good." "I've heard." Whatever you heard, ma'am, it's worse than that. Ahead of them, Caleb made a sound that might have been a laugh and might have been a cough. He didn't turn around. Evelyn rode for another quarter mile and then said, because she had to say something or she was going to start screaming into the wind, "How much farther?" Caleb half turned in the saddle. "You'll see the house soon." Soon turned out to mean another 40 minutes. The sun was going down behind them now, and the whole country was turning the color of an old penny, and her thighs had passed through pain into a kind of detached numbness. She suspected she'd pay for tomorrow. She had stopped thinking about anything except the next swing of the horse's stride. She was so tired she didn't notice when Caleb pulled up at the top of the rise, and she nearly rode her mare into the back of his. "Easy," he said, and put a hand on the mare's bridle. "Look." She looked. For a moment her mind refused the information. The land fell away in front of them into a wide, shallow bowl, a valley maybe 2 miles across at its narrowest. A creek ran through it, catching the last of the sunset like a vein of melted copper. There were corrals, there were barns, there were 4 outbuildings she couldn't identify. There was a long, low bunkhouse with smoke curling out of a stone chimney, and beyond it a horse pasture where she counted, dazed, more than 30 animals before she gave up counting. There were riders moving along the far ridge. She could see them as black pinpricks against the brass-colored sky, and they were carrying rifles, and they were patrolling, and there was a house. It was not a cabin. It was a house the size of the bank in Philadelphia where her father had begged for an extension on his loan in the last year of his life. 2 stories of cut stone and dressed timber with a porch that ran the whole length of it, and tall windows already lit from inside by what could only be lamps in every room. A house that had not been built. A house that had been imagined and then bought into the world. A house that announced itself to the valley like a fist on a table. Evelyn stared at it. She kept staring at it. She felt the blood leave her face in one long, slow draining. Her hands on the saddle horn went cold. "Mr. Grayson?" "Ma'am." "What is that?" "That's the house." "That's the house." "Yes. That is the house you described in your letters." He didn't answer. She turned in the saddle and looked at him. Really looked at him, for the first time since he'd ridden up at the crossroads, the dust on his hat, the scar across the back of his left hand, the way his jaw was set, the way his eyes were anywhere but on her face. "You wrote me," she said, "that you had a small house that needed a woman's touch." "I did." "You wrote me that you weren't a rich man." "I never wrote that. Go back and look." "You said you didn't have much." "I said I had land and work." "I do." "Mr. Grayson?" "Caleb." "Mr. Grayson." Her voice was shaking. She hated it. She hated that it was shaking. "If you have lied to me, I want to know the size of the lie before I get any closer to that house. Because once I am inside that house, I will have to ask you for things I do not want to ask anyone for, and I would rather sleep in this grass tonight than ask under a false understanding." He looked at her then. He looked at her for a long moment, and his face did something she couldn't name. It wasn't shame. It wasn't pride. It was closer to the way a man looks when he's been holding a hot iron behind his back for so long that he's forgotten what his hand used to feel like. "Henry," he said, without taking his eyes off her, "take Sam and run the trunk down. Tell Mrs. Halloran we'll be a few minutes." "Yes, sir." The 2 riders peeled off and started down the slope at a trot. The horse carrying her trunk swayed and disappeared into the long evening shadow of the barn. In a minute, Evelyn could no longer hear them. It was just the 2 of them on the ridge then, with the sunset behind and the valley in front, and the wind moving the dry grass against the horse's fetlocks, with a sound like paper being slowly torn. "Get down," he said. "I will not." "Suit yourself." He swung off his own horse and walked a few steps away from her, and stood there looking down at the valley with his thumbs hooked in his belt. He didn't speak for a while. When he didn't turn around. "I have about 4,000 head," he said. "I own this valley and most of the next one. I've got 18 men on the payroll and another dozen come for the spring drive. The house was my father's. He built it the year I was born and died in it when I was 26. I have more money in the Cheyenne Bank than I know what to do with, and I have made more every year for 9 years, and I expect I will make more next year. That is the size of the lie. That is what I have." He turned then, and his face in the last of the light was the face of a man who had practiced this speech and still couldn't deliver it without breaking something inside. "And I have had," he said, "4 women come out here in 7 years to marry me. The first 3 lasted long enough to see the house. They each had a different reason for going home. None of the reasons was about me. One of them, the second one, left me a note saying I had a good barn. Like that was the highest praise she could think of. Like I was a fixture in a stable she'd decided not to lease." "Mr. Grayson, let me finish. I lied to you in the letters. I admit it. I wrote them the way I wrote them because I was tired of women looking at the house before they looked at me. I wanted one to come out here believing she was marrying a man who had nothing so I could find out, just once, what it was like to be wanted without it. That's a selfish reason. I know it's a selfish reason. I am not asking you to forgive it. I am only telling you what it was." He stopped. He took his hat off and turned it in his hands like he didn't know what to do with it. "You can go back," he said. "The wagon that brought your trunk can take you to the railhead at sunup. I will pay your passage anywhere you want to go. I will give you money on top of it. You don't owe me anything. Not the trip, not the wait, not a goddamn polite word. You can hate me from here to Philadelphia, and I won't say one thing against you doing it." Evelyn sat on the mare. The mare bent her head to crop at the grass. The little sound of teeth tearing at the stems was the loudest thing in the world. She thought about this boarding house in Philadelphia. She thought about the way the landlady had looked at her the morning she left, like she was glad to see the back of one more unlucky woman. She thought about the creditor with his soft, apologetic voice, and the auction notice on the front door of the only house she'd ever lived in, and her father's coffin going into the ground in the rain. She thought about the 17 letters in her valise. She thought about how she had read them, alone in her room at night, by the light of a single candle she was rationing, and how she had begun to think of the man who wrote them as the only person in the world who had ever asked her to come somewhere instead of asking her to leave. She thought about how that man did not exist. She thought about how she was sitting on a horse on a ridge in Wyoming, looking at a mansion lit up like a cathedral, and she was alone in a way she had not been even in the boarding house. She was so angry, her hands were shaking. She was angrier than she had been at the creditor, angrier than she had been at her father for dying with his debts unsorted, angrier than she had ever been at a single person in her life. "You son of a bitch," she said. He didn't move. "You son of a bitch. Do you have any idea what I sold to get here? Do you know what I gave up? I sold my mother's china. I sold my father's books. I sold the pearl pin my grandmother gave me when I turned 16. I sold every dress I owned that wasn't this one, and the 2 in that trunk down there. I rode a train for 4 days sitting up because I couldn't afford a berth, and I ate bread and apples for 3 of them because I couldn't afford anything else. And I did all of that because a man in Wyoming wrote me that he had nothing and would share it with me. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what it means to a woman who has lost everything to be told that nothing is what she is going to be offered and to choose to take it anyway?" Her voice cracked. She didn't stop. "And now you tell me it was a test. You tell me you sat in that big house and wrote those letters like a man baiting a trap to see what kind of animal he caught. Do you know what I think of you, Mr. Grayson? I think you are a coward. I think you are the worst kind of coward. The kind who is so afraid of being used that he uses other people first and calls it caution. And I think you have been so rich for so long that you have forgotten that some of us are not pieces in your experiment. Some of us are people with 1 suitcase and 17 letters and no other place on this earth to go." She was crying. She hadn't meant to. She wiped her face with the back of her glove, and the glove came away gritty. He had not moved the whole time she was speaking. He stood with his hat in his hands and his shoulders very still. And when she stopped, he kept standing there, and the wind moved his hair where the hat had been, and she could see he was going gray at the temples, just a little, just enough that she felt for one terrible instant a tenderness toward him that she fought down like an enemy. "You're right," he said. She waited. "You're right about all of it." He looked at the hat in his hands. "I've been called worse than a coward by better men than your father, miss, and I expect I'll be called worse than that again. I'm not going to argue with you. I have been a coward about this for 7 years, and the proof is standing on a ridge in front of me with her face dirty from crying, and I did that. I did that to you. I'm sorry. I don't want your apology." "I know you don't. What I want is to know what happens now." He put his hat back on. He took a long breath, like a man preparing to lift something heavy. "Whatever you want to happen," he said. "If you want to go back, you go back. If you want to come down to the house and sleep in a clean bed and decide in the morning, you do that. There's a room ready. Mrs. Halloran has been airing it for a week. There's a lock on the door, and the key is in the lock, and nobody will turn the handle except you. You can lock yourself in for 3 days if you want to. Nobody will say one word. And if I stay, then we figure it out. I won't make you marry me. I won't ask you to. We had an agreement, and I broke the spirit of it, and that's on me. If you want to stay on as, I don't know, as a guest, as anything, until you've decided where you want to go. I'll pay you a wage if you want to work. I'll pay you nothing if you don't. You decide. Anything you decide, I'll do. You will do what I decide. Yes, ma'am. Just like that. Just like that." She looked at him. He was a tall, tired man in dusty clothes on a ridge in a country she did not understand, in front of a house she could not have imagined a week ago. And he had just handed her, in the space of 3 sentences, more power over a man than she had held over anyone in her life. She did not know what to do with it. She was 28 years old, and she had been a daughter and a debtor and a passenger and a fiancée by correspondence, and she had not, in any of those roles, been asked what she wanted and then told it would be done. She did not trust it. She did not trust him. But the sun was almost gone, and the wind off the valley had turned cold, and her thighs hurt, and her face was tight from crying. And somewhere down in the bowl of land below her, there was a room with a lock and a clean bed, and she presumed food. "I will come down to the house," she said. "All right. I am not deciding anything else." "Understood. Tomorrow I will tell you what I want." "Yes, ma'am. And if you have lied to me about one more thing, Mr. Grayson, I will take whatever money you offer me, and I will go, and you will not hear from me again, and you will deserve every empty room in that house for the rest of your life." He looked at her then, full in the face, for the second time that evening. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I expect I would." They rode down to the house in the dark. The lamps on the porch grew larger as they came, and then she could see the shapes of 2 women standing under them, one tall and one short, both in white aprons. The short one was wringing her hands. The tall one was not. As they came into the light, the tall one stepped down off the porch and came forward to take the mare's bridle. And Evelyn saw she was a woman of maybe 50, with iron gray hair and a tight bun, and a face like a Bible page, lined and patient, and not telling you anything. "Miss Mercer," she said, "I'm Halloran. I keep the house." "Mrs. Halloran." "There's a bath drawn upstairs and supper on a tray. I didn't lay the table because Mr. Grayson said you'd want quiet." Evelyn looked down at Caleb. He had dismounted and was holding her stirrup. He had thought, somewhere on the ride, to tell the housekeeper she might want quiet. She did not know what to do with that either. She swung her leg over the saddle. Her knees almost gave when she touched the ground, and Caleb's hand was at her elbow before she'd registered the buckle, and gone again before she could think about whether to pull away. He stepped back from her. He stepped back farther than he needed to. "Mrs. Halloran will see you up," he said. "I'll be in the office if you want anything. I don't sleep much." "All right. Miss Mercer." "Yes." "I'm sorry." He said it without looking at her. He said it the way he had handed her the reins of the mare at the crossroads, like a fact dropped between them that she could pick up or leave lying in the dirt as she chose. She didn't answer. She turned and walked up the porch steps. The boards were new under her boots, and the light from the lamps was butter yellow and warm, and inside the open door she could see a hallway with a polished floor and a great staircase curving up into a darkness lit only by a single lamp on the landing. She stepped into the house she had crossed 2,000 miles to enter. Mrs. Halloran followed her in and shut the door behind them, and the sound it made was the small final sound of a door closing on a life that had ended without Evelyn noticing the moment. She climbed the stairs holding the banister with both hands. Behind her, somewhere outside, she heard Caleb Grayson speak quietly to his horse. She heard the horse answer with a soft, blowing breath. She heard his boots on the gravel, moving away, around to the back of the house, toward whatever room a man like that called an office. She did not look back. At the top of the stairs, Mrs. Halloran opened a door onto a bedroom larger than the parlor of the house in Philadelphia, where Evelyn had grown up. There was a bed with 4 posts and a quilt as wide as a wagon, and a fire in the grate, and a tin tub steaming on a sheet of canvas, and a tray on a small table with bread and cold beef, and a pot of something that smelled like tea. There was a key in the lock, just as he had said. "Will there be anything else, Miss Mercer?" Evelyn stood in the middle of the room and felt the heat from the fire on the front of her dress, and the cold from the long ride still on the back of it, and for one short moment she thought she might fall down where she stood. "No," she said. "No, thank you, Mrs. Halloran." "Sleep as long as you can, then. Nobody will disturb you." "Mrs. Halloran." "Yes, ma'am." "How long have you worked for him?" The housekeeper paused with her hand on the door. 23 years, she said. "I came with his mother when she married his father. I stayed when she died. I stayed when he died. I'll stay till they put me in the ground." "What kind of man is he?" The woman looked at her. She did not look surprised by the question. She looked like she had been waiting for someone to ask it for a long time. "He is a man," she said, "who has been lonely so long he doesn't remember any other way to be. And he is a man who would not have brought you here if he didn't mean to do right by you, whatever he's already done wrong." She closed the door softly behind her. Evelyn stood listening until the footsteps went down the stairs and away. Then she walked to the door and turned the key in the lock, and the bolt slid home with a small, solid sound that, despite everything, despite the lie and the ridge, and the long ride and the man down in some office she could not picture, made her shoulders come down for the first time in 3 months. She walked to the window. She pulled the curtain aside. Out across the dark valley, in the long sweep of country between the house and the ridges, she could see pinpricks of light, the lanterns of the riders he had spoken of, moving slowly along the rim of his land, guarding it. Guarding her, she supposed, now that she was inside it, whether she had asked to be or not. She let the curtain fall. She sat down on the edge of the enormous bed in her dusty traveling dress. She took her gloves off slowly, one finger at a time. She set them on the quilt beside her. She looked at her own hands. They were red at the knuckles and dry across the backs, and there was a thin half-moon of dirt under her thumbnail from the ride. She thought very clearly, the way you think when you are too tired to lie to yourself anymore. "I will not go home tomorrow. I have nowhere to go home to. I will stay until I have figured out what to take from him for what he has done. And then I will decide whether I am the kind of woman who takes it and leaves, or the kind of woman who takes it and stays." And then she thought, "I do not yet know which kind of woman I am." She blew out the lamp on the bedside table. In the dark, the fire made a low breathing sound, and somewhere downstairs a clock she could not see struck 9, and she lay down on top of the quilt in her boots and her dress and her travel dust, and she slept the hard, dreamless sleep of an animal that has run a long way and finally found a wall to put its back against. Down at the far end of the house, in the room he called an office, because he didn't know what else to call a room with a desk and a window and a bottle, Caleb Grayson sat with his hat on the desk and his hands flat on either side of it and looked at the dark glass of the window without seeing anything in it. He had rehearsed many things to say to her. He had rehearsed them on the ride out. He had rehearsed them at the crossroads while she was sitting on her trunk in the dust, and he was still half a mile off, watching her through a spyglass to make sure she wasn't already gone. He had rehearsed them on the ridge. He had not rehearsed, "You're right." He had not rehearsed, "I'm sorry." He had not rehearsed any of what he had actually said, and now he was sitting in the dark of his own house with the weight of it in his chest like a stone he had swallowed by accident. He poured himself a drink. He did not drink it. He sat looking at it for a long time, and then he got up and walked out onto the back gallery and stood at the rail and looked at the dark shape of the barn and the dim moving lights of the night riders working the rim. He had thought, when he wrote those letters, that he was protecting himself. He understood now, standing in the cold, that what he had been doing was something else entirely. He had been hiding, and he had finally hidden himself so well that a woman had come 2,000 miles to find a man who did not exist, and the man who did exist had to stand on a ridge in front of her and watch her face change when she saw the size of his lie. He gripped the rail until his knuckles hurt. Up in the house, in a room he could not see from where he was standing, the only lamp in the upstairs hall went out, and the long, low shape of the Grayson place settled into the kind of dark it had been in every night for 7 years, except that tonight there was a woman behind a locked door at the top of the stairs, and she was angry, and she was tired, and she had not gone home. It was not, he thought, anything like enough, but it was more than he had a right to, and it was a place, for the first time in a long time, from which something could begin. He stood at the rail until the cold went all the way through his shirt, Then he went back inside, and he turned down the wick on his office lamp, and he sat in the dark and waited for morning the way a man waits for a verdict, not knowing if it would acquit him, and not, in any honest accounting, expecting it to. Morning came into the room before she was ready for it. Evelyn opened her eyes to a square of pale gray light on a quilt she didn't recognize, and for one long, suspended moment she did not know where she was. She knew she was lying on top of a bed instead of in it. She knew her boots were still on her feet. She knew her mouth tasted like the inside of a coin purse. Then the smell of the place came back to her. Clean linen and old timber and wood smoke from a fire that had long since burned down to ash. And the whole evening came with it, dropping into her chest like a stone into still water. She sat up slowly. Her thighs were locked stiff from the ride. Her hands, when she lifted them, felt as though somebody else had borrowed them in the night and not put them back quite right. She got off the bed by stages, like an old woman, and stood at the window with the curtain pulled back and looked at the valley. It was a different country in the daylight. The sun was just up over the eastern ridges, throwing long blue shadows out behind every cottonwood and every fence post and every standing horse. The creek she had seen as a vein of copper the night before was running clear and bright between cut banks, and there were men down at the corrals already, not riding, just leaning on the rails the way men do at first light, talking about whatever they were going to be talking about before the work started. Smoke was coming from the bunkhouse chimney. A dog was trotting along the porch rail with its nose to the boards. Somewhere a hammer was hitting iron in a steady, patient rhythm. It looked from the window like the kind of place she had read about in books when she was a girl. It looked like a painting. And the man who owned it had lied to her about owning it, and she was standing at his window with her hair coming down out of its pins, and she did not know yet what she was going to do about any of it. She washed her face in the basin somebody had left in the night. The water was cold. She was grateful for the cold. She put on the second of her shirtwaists, which was wrinkled but clean, and she did her hair the plain way her mother had taught her, and she looked at herself in the mirror over the washstand and did not entirely recognize the woman who looked back. There was a knock at the door. Miss Mercer. It was Mrs. Halloran's voice, low and even, like a woman who had been knocking on doors at this hour for 23 years. Breakfast whenever you're ready, or in your room if you'd rather. Evelyn unlocked the door and opened it. The housekeeper had a tray in her hands, but she had not assumed. She stood with the tray held out a few inches, waiting to be told. "I'll come down," Evelyn said. "Mr. Grayson's in the office. He said to tell you he won't take breakfast in the dining room unless you ask for him." "He said that?" "Yes, ma'am. And if I don't ask for him, then he won't be there." Evelyn looked at the woman a moment longer. There was nothing in Mrs. Halloran's face, not pity, not judgment, not curiosity, just a steady professional patience that Evelyn understood suddenly was a kindness all its own. "I'll come down," she said again. "Alone, please. He can take his breakfast wherever he likes." "Yes, ma'am." The dining room was at the front of the house, with windows the height of a man and a long table that could have seated 20. They had laid one place at the end nearest the door, with a single chair, and on the table was a pot of coffee and a covered dish that turned out to hold eggs and a slab of ham, and a plate of biscuits under a cloth, and a small jar of yellow honey. Evelyn sat down in the chair and looked at all of it, and felt, against her will, the prickle of tears at the back of her throat. She had not eaten a proper hot breakfast in 3 months. She had been existing on bread and weak tea and whatever Charity put on the table at the boarding house, and the people who lived in this house ate like this every morning while she had been measuring out apples by the day on a train. She ate slowly. She made herself. She was halfway through her second cup of coffee when she heard a wagon pull up outside, and a man's voice, not Caleb's, calling something across the yard, and then the sound of women's voices answering, 2 of them, light and quick. She set her cup down. Mrs. Halloran came through from the kitchen with a small frown moving across her forehead like a cloud. "Miss Mercer." "What is it?" "Mrs. Aldridge has come over from the Bar W. with her daughter." "I don't know who that is." "No, ma'am, you wouldn't yet." "Should I know?" The housekeeper hesitated. It was the first time Evelyn had seen her hesitate at anything, and it was, in its small way, more alarming than the wagon. "The Aldridges own the next valley over," Mrs. Halloran said. "They're neighborly. They like to call early, before a household is quite ready for callers." She set the coffee pot down very gently. Mr. Grayson's gone out to the south pasture with the men. He won't be back till dinner. If you would prefer not to receive them, I can tell them you're indisposed from the journey. And they would know that was a lie. Yes, ma'am, they would know. Evelyn looked at her plate, then at the door. Then she stood up and smoothed her skirt and ran a hand over her hair, and she thought, all right then, so it starts today. Show them in, Mrs. Halloran. Are you sure? No, Evelyn said, but show them in anyway. They came in like weather. The mother first, a tall, well-fed woman of perhaps 50, in a traveling cloak that had cost somebody 3 steers. Her gray hair done up in a way that had been fashionable in St. Louis maybe 4 years ago, and was not fashionable anywhere any longer. Her face was pleasant in the way a closed door is pleasant. It gave you nothing, but it didn't keep you out either, not yet. Behind her came a daughter of about 20 in a dove-colored dress and a bonnet that looked like it had never been outside of a parlor. The girl had her mother's mouth and somebody else's eyes, sharper than the mother's, quicker, the eyes of a person who took inventory. Miss Mercer. The mother held out both gloved hands as though they had been friends for years. Beulah Aldridge. And this is my Cora. We have been so very eager to make your acquaintance. Mrs. Aldridge. Oh, Beulah, please. We don't stand on ceremony out here. We can't afford to. The country's too big. Beulah, then. Sit, sit. The woman sat herself before Evelyn could offer, settling on the upholstered chair nearest the window as if she had sat in it many times before. Cora took the chair beside her. Mrs. Halloran appeared in the doorway with fresh cups on a tray, set them down without a sound, and withdrew. Evelyn saw her glance, a single, level glance, at Beulah Aldridge as she went, and the glance was not friendly. My dear, Beulah said, we could not believe it when we heard. A Philadelphia woman. Cora has been begging me for 2 days to bring her over. Has she? Tell us everything. The journey, the trains. Was it dreadful? I am told it is dreadful. I came out from St. Louis as a bride 26 years ago, and I thought I would die in Nebraska. Did you nearly die in Nebraska? I sat for a day and a half in Ogallala. Oh, Ogallala! Beulah laid a hand over her heart. Cora, did you hear? Ogallala. I heard, Mama. The daughter had not yet spoken with her own voice. Now she did. It was a softer voice than the mother's, smaller, with something cool slipped under it like a knife under a napkin. And how are you finding the ranch, Miss Mercer? I have only been here since last evening. Yes, but first impressions, they say so much. What did you think when you first saw the house? There was a small silence. Evelyn picked up her cup. She set it down again without drinking. It was not what I had been led to expect, she said. Beulah laughed. It was a high, pretty, practiced laugh, and there was nothing in it of any humor. Oh, Caleb, she said, as though the absent man were a naughty child. He is so private, so modest. He never tells anyone what he has. He never has since his father died. Cora, didn't I always say so? You always said so, Mama. He is just like his father in that way. The senior Mr. Grayson was the most retiring man. Built that beautiful house, and never gave a single dinner in it. Not one. We used to tease him about it, didn't we, Cora? You did, Mama. I was small. Yes, you were small. The mother turned back to Evelyn, and her eyes were very bright. But of course, dear, you understand. Out here, modesty is a kindness. A man like Caleb Grayson cannot announce his circumstances. Can he? Or he would have every unmarried woman from Cheyenne to Denver on his porch by supper time. So he keeps it quiet. He is very careful about who he tells what. Evelyn looked at her. She understood, with a clarity that surprised her, that she was being told something underneath what was being said. She understood she was being told it on purpose. She understood that the older woman across from her was watching her face the way a card player watches a hand, looking for the small movement that gives away the cards. She kept her face still. That is very thoughtful of him, she said. Isn't it? Beulah beamed. Now, we have come on an errand. We are giving a small gathering at the end of next month. Nothing grand. A supper, some dancing, a few of the better families from the territory. We would be honored if you would come, as our guests. As Caleb's guests, of course. I have already sent the invitation to him formally. But I wanted to put the question to you myself, Because frankly, my dear, I know how it is to be new in a place. I was new once. I remember. That's kind of you. It is not kind at all. It is selfish. I want a new face at my table. We have all been looking at each other's faces for years and years out here. Cora set her cup down with a small, neat click. Mama, she said, we mustn't keep Miss Mercer. No, of course. Beulah did not move. Tell me one thing first, my dear. Just one. We have all been so curious. How did you and dear Caleb meet? The question landed in the middle of the table like a coin spun on its edge. Evelyn felt heat come up the back of her neck. She felt the shape of the lie the man she had not yet decided whether to marry had told her, and she felt the shape of the smaller, more private lie she would now have to tell on his behalf if she wanted any kind of life in this country at all, and she felt sharply that she had been put into this exact position on purpose by this exact woman, for a reason she did not yet understand but could guess at. She took a slow breath. Through correspondence, she said, a mutual acquaintance. How romantic, Beulah breathed. And were you long acquainted before he sent for you? Long enough. Long enough. The older woman smiled. Well, he is a fortunate man, my dear. You must let us help you settle. There are 1,000 things a woman needs to know out here that she cannot learn from a book. Cora knows everything. Don't you, Cora? You must let her teach you the country ways. I would be very glad to help, Miss Mercer, Cora said. She said it without lifting her eyes from her teacup. When they were gone, when the wagon had rolled out of the yard with Beulah Aldridge waving a gloved hand from the seat like a queen leaving a city, Evelyn stood at the window of the dining room and watched them go, and she did not move until the dust they had raised had settled back to the road. Mrs. Halloran came in behind her with the empty cups on a tray. Mrs. Halloran. Yes, ma'am. Who is that woman to him? The housekeeper set the tray down. She did not look at Evelyn when she answered. She looked at the table. The daughter, Miss Cora, she said, was engaged to Mr. Grayson for 4 months, 6 years back. She broke it off 2 weeks before the wedding. Why? Because she did not care for the way he ran his house. That's what she said. She wanted the dining room moved to the east side, and the front hall papered, and the gallery torn down and put back up the other way. He told her she could change anything she wanted after they were married. She told him she would not be married into a house she could not change first. Mrs. Halloran finally lifted her eyes. He has not asked anyone to marry him since. Until me. Until you. And you came by way of a letter, which I expect he meant as a kind of armor. Evelyn pressed her fingers against the edge of the windowsill. And the mother. The mother has spent 6 years putting it out that her daughter was the one who escaped, not the one who was let go. Mrs. Halloran picked up the tray again. She will be civil to your face, ma'am. She has been civil to me for 23 years, and I would still not turn my back on her at a butchering. Evelyn almost laughed. It was a small sound, more breath than voice, and it hurt a little in her chest on the way out, like coughing up dust. Thank you, Mrs. Halloran. Ma'am, for telling me. The housekeeper paused at the door. If you'll forgive me, Miss Mercer, there are some things in this house I have been waiting a long time to tell somebody. I was beginning to think there would never be anybody to tell them to. She went out. Evelyn stood at the window a while longer. Then she went and found her gloves. She found Caleb at the south pasture by following the sound of cattle. She had asked Henry, who had been mending a length of fence by the kitchen garden, and who had nearly dropped his hammer when she said she wanted to ride out. He had saddled the sorrel mare for her without comment and offered to ride with her. She had told him no. He had looked unhappy about it for about 3 seconds, and then he had said, Ma'am, the south pasture's straight along the creek till you can't ride any further south. You can't get lost if you keep the water on your left. And he had not tried to talk her out of it again, which she added silently to the small list of things she did not yet hate about Wyoming. She rode slowly. Her thighs hurt from the day before, and she was not too proud to admit it to herself, even if she would have died before admitting it to Henry. The creek did its work. She rode with the water on her left and watched the willows bend in the wind and tried to keep her mind on the country instead of on the woman with the bonnet and the daughter with the knife in her voice. She found the men 3 miles out working a small herd of cattle out of a brushy draw. Caleb was on his horse at the head of the draw with his hat pulled low against the sun, calling something to a rider she could not see. The rider answered. A steer broke from the bunch, and Caleb leaned low, and his horse went after it without him seeming to have asked it to. He cut it back into the herd in 3 quick movements and reined up easy and lifted his hand to wipe his face on his sleeve, and that was when he saw her. He sat very still for a moment. Then he said something to Henry. Henry had ridden up beside him from somewhere. Henry had also disobeyed her, she noticed, but at a distance which she would allow, and he turned the horse and rode over. He pulled up about 10 feet away, same as the crossroads. He had, she was beginning to realize, a habit of stopping 10 feet away from a person, like a man who'd been told once too often that he crowded. "Miss Mercer." "Mr. Grayson." He waited. She had not known exactly what she was going to say to him until she said it. "Mrs. Aldridge came to call." His face did a small thing, not a change of expression so much as a movement underneath the expression, like a fish moving under ice. He didn't say anything. "With her daughter." "I see." "She invited us to a supper at the end of next month." "I see." "She asked me how we met." He looked at her for a long moment. "What did you tell her?" "I told her through correspondence. A mutual acquaintance." "That was kind of you." "It was not kind." "No," he said. "I expect it wasn't." He swung down off the horse then. He came up to her stirrup but no closer, and he stood there with his hat in his hand and the wind moving his hair and the cattle making their low, complaining noise behind him. "I should have told you about her," he said. "Cora." "You should have told me about a lot of things." "Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Halloran told me." "Mrs. Halloran is a good woman." She did not seem to like Mrs. Aldridge. "Mrs. Halloran has good taste." She almost smiled. She did not let herself. "Mr. Grayson." "Caleb." "Mr. Grayson, I am going to stay." He went very still. "I am not telling you I am going to marry you. I am telling you I am going to stay. Until I have decided. I am telling you because that woman will be watching me, and her daughter will be watching me, and the men down at that bunkhouse will be watching me, and I will not be watched as a guest. I will be watched as a woman who is doing something. All right. I want to work. All right. I do not know what I am doing. I grew up in a city. I helped my father with a piece of farmland in Pennsylvania, which was 100 acres of bad clay and which we lost anyway, so I am not bringing very much. But I am bringing 2 hands, and I am not afraid of weather, and you will pay me a wage like any other hand you have, and I will earn it. All right, and when I have decided what I want to do, I will tell you. I will not tell that woman. I will not tell her daughter. I will not tell Mrs. Halloran, although she will know before I do because she knows everything. I will tell you, Mr. Grayson, and you alone, and I will tell you to your face. All right. Stop saying all right. He almost smiled. He didn't. He looked down at his hat and turned it in his hands. I don't know what else to say to you, Miss Mercer. You are telling me what is going to happen. I am agreeing to it. That is the answer. You are not going to argue. No, ma'am. You are not going to tell me a woman should not be working with the hands. I have been on this ranch since I was 9 years old. I have seen women do almost everything a man can do on a ranch, and 1 or 2 things he can't. I am not going to say a word about it. And the men will say what they want to say. They will say it where I can hear it the first time and not the second. After that, they will not say it at all. If they do, they will not be here. He looked up at her. That part you can leave to me. She watched him for a long moment. She wanted to be angry with him still. She was angry with him still. The anger was sitting in her chest where it had been since the ridge. A hot, low coal she did not intend to let go cold any time soon. But she was also a woman who had grown up watching her father, who had been a kind man and a poor businessman, fail at one thing after another because he could never bring himself to listen all the way through what somebody was telling him before he started agreeing. Her father had agreed people right into ruin. Her father had said yes to creditors the way other men said no, and he had died in debt because of it. The man in front of her was not saying yes the way her father had said yes. The man in front of her was standing in front of his stirrup with his hat in his hand, and he was listening. And what he was saying back was small, and his face was not pleased, and she had the strong, uncomfortable feeling that he meant every word. There is one more thing, she said. Ma'am, you will not tell anyone what I told you on the ridge. No, ma'am. You will not tell anyone I cried. I had already forgotten, Miss Mercer. It was the first thing he had said that came close to flirting, and he said it so flat and tired that she could not even take offense at it. He said it like a man stating a fact about the weather. "All right," she said. "All right." "Now stop saying that." "Yes, ma'am." She turned the mare. The mare, who was a sensible animal and who had decided somewhere on the ride out that this woman knew what she was doing even when she didn't, turned with her. Behind her, she heard Caleb swing back up into his saddle. She heard him call something low to Henry. She heard Henry answer. She did not look back until she was almost at the top of the rise, and then she only looked back because she could not help it. And what she saw was Caleb Grayson sitting his horse at the head of the draw with the sun in his face and the cattle moving slow behind him, watching her ride away, with his hat held against his chest like a man at a funeral, or a man making a promise, she could not tell which. She turned the mare back toward the house. The wind off the valley had warmed since the morning. The grass was moving in long, slow waves the way water moves in a wide, shallow pan. Somewhere up ahead, on the porch of a house she did not yet think of as hers, a housekeeper she was beginning to trust would be waiting with a cup of something hot. Somewhere on the road out of the valley, a wagon she was beginning to dread was rolling toward the next valley over, carrying a woman who had taken inventory of her face this morning the way a banker takes inventory of a strange coin. And somewhere inside Evelyn Mercer, a thing she had thought she lost when her father went into the ground in Pennsylvania was sitting up slowly, shaking the dust off itself and beginning to take inventory back. The summer that came down on the valley that year was the kind old men talked about for the rest of their lives, and the talk was never good talk. By the middle of June, the creek was running narrow enough that Evelyn could cross it on stepping stones in places where, in May, she had watched a steer swim. The grass along the south pasture went from green to yellow, and from yellow to a brittle, papery brown that broke under a horse's hoof with a sound like somebody crumpling a letter. The sky stayed clear day after day, and the clear sky, which would have meant pleasure to a Philadelphia woman 2 months before, now sat on Evelyn's chest the way bad news sits on the chest of a person who has been waiting a long time for the doctor to come downstairs. She had been at the ranch 4 months. She had not married him. She had not gone home. She had, in the week since the morning Beulah Aldridge took her inventory and rode away with it, become a thing that did not have a clean name. She slept upstairs in the locked room, and she ate at the long table, and she rode out with the men at first light. And she had her own horse now, a leggy bay gelding called Pilot that Caleb had given her without ceremony one morning when the sorrel mare came up lame. He had handed her the reins of the bay and said, "He'll work harder than you can, miss. Don't be polite to him." And that had been the whole of the speech, and she had been riding Pilot every day since. She had learned things. She had learned that a cow with her head down was thinking about running, and that a cow with her head up was thinking about charging, and that the difference between the two was about 3 seconds of warning if you were paying attention. She had learned how to read the wind off the ridges by the way the dust moved in the corral. She had learned that the older hand, Sam, did not speak unless something was on fire or somebody was dying, and that when he did speak, you stopped what you were doing and listened because his sentences had been distilled over 40 years of bad weather and worse luck, down to the absolute necessary. She had learned that Henry could not, for the life of him, keep a piece of straw out of the brim of his hat, and that he carried, in his shirt pocket, a daguerreotype of a girl named Ruth in Missouri, whom he wrote to every Sunday, and who had not written back in 2.5 years, and who he still spoke of as though the next letter were already in the mail. She had learned the names of every horse in the home pasture and most of the dogs. She had learned that the men, after the first week of staring at her with the open, unembarrassed curiosity of men who had not seen many women up close in some months, had decided to leave her alone. She did not know what Caleb had said to them. She had not asked. She had been mending fence with Henry one afternoon in early May, and she had heard from over the rise a man she did not know say loudly to another, "She rides like a damn—" And then there had been a sharp, short word from Sam, and the sentence had not been finished, and that had been the end of the conversation. She had not raised her head from the fencing pliers. She had set the staple, driven the nail, moved on to the next post. Henry had pretended not to notice. She had pretended he had not pretended. They had spent the afternoon discussing with great seriousness the relative merits of 2 different kinds of dog. She had learned that Caleb Grayson, when he was not playing the part of the man who owned a great deal of country, was a person. It had taken her a long time to see it. He was a quiet man. He did not push. He did not ask her at supper how her day had been. He asked her instead whether the gelding was favoring his offhind, which she had not yet mentioned, and which he had noticed at noon 50 yards away, while she was riding past the bunkhouse. He read at night in a chair by the office window, books that surprised her when she finally looked at the spines, books about cattle and books about land law, but also a worn-out volume of Marcus Aurelius that he had taken with him into the territory when he was 19 years old, he told her, because his father had given it to him and he had not known what else to bring. He drank a small whiskey in the evenings. He did not drink a second one. He did not, in 4 months, lay a hand on her, not once, not on the elbow, not on the shoulder. He stood 10 feet away from her when she came into a room he was in, and then he stood 12, as if making sure she could feel the distance. She had thought at first that he was afraid of her. Then she had thought he was afraid of himself. Then, slowly, over weeks, she had come to understand that he was afraid of the moment she would finally decide to leave. He was making it possible, with every careful inch of space, for her to walk out the door without having to step around him. He was building her a clear path to the gate the way a man builds a wide aisle for a frightened animal. It made her angry, and it made her tired, and it made her, in a way she did not yet have a word for, very sad. By the second week of June, the talk in the bunkhouse had stopped being about the dance at the Aldridges, which Evelyn had attended on Caleb's arm in May, an address Mrs. Halloran had altered for her from one of his late mothers, and at which she had been smiled at by Beulah Aldridge with such warm and deadly affection that she had spent the carriage ride home with her hands clenched in her lap, and had started being about the fire risk. Sam said it first, in early June. They were sitting around the kitchen door in the long evening light, 6 or 7 of them, with their hats off, and Henry had been complaining about the price of horseshoes, and Sam had said, without looking up from the cup of coffee in his hand, "There's going to be a fire." That was the whole sentence. Then he drank his coffee. Henry had looked at him. "Where, Sam?" "Here." "What makes you say that?" "It hasn't rained since Easter, son." He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. After that night, the word fire started to live in the bunkhouse the way a sick relative lives in a house, never named in the rooms where it might be heard, but understood by everyone to be there. The men began to clear brush around the home buildings without being told to. Caleb rode out with 2 men one morning and came back at sundown with the news that the Fry place, 18 miles to the south, had already burned out their hay barn and a quarter section of pasture from what Fry thought was a careless rider's pipe. And the Fry place was on the wind side of the Grayson Ranch, and the wind, when it came from the south. Evelyn watched Caleb at supper that night. He ate slowly. He did not say much. He set his fork down halfway through and sat looking at the window with his face arranged the way a man arranges his face when he does not want anyone at the table to know what is happening behind it. Mrs. Halloran came in to clear and went out, and came in to bring coffee, and went out, and Caleb did not look up. "How bad?" Evelyn said finally. He raised his eyes. "How bad what?" "How bad will it be?" He held her gaze for a long moment. "It's going to be very bad, miss." "How bad is very bad?" "If it comes up the south draw and the wind is what it has been for 10 days, we will lose the south pasture in an afternoon. We will lose the home pasture by sundown. We will lose the bunkhouse and the barns by dark. If it goes another 12 hours past that, we will lose the house. And the cattle. We will lose most of the cattle." He said it the way Sam said things. Flat. Without ornament. A fact handed across the table. "What are you going to do?" He looked at his hands. "I have been thinking about that for 2 weeks," he said, "and the answer I keep getting back is one I do not like." "Tell me." "I have been thinking that when the fire comes, if the wind is wrong, I will move the herd out of the south draw and let the south pasture burn. And if it keeps coming, I will move them out of the home pasture and let that burn too. And if it keeps coming past that, I will turn the herd loose, and we will fight for the house and the barns with whatever men I have, and we will lose maybe half of what we own, and we will be lucky to lose only that much." "You will turn the cattle loose." "I will." "You said you have 4,000 head." "I do." "How many would you lose?" "Half more." "How much is that in money?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Miss Mercer." "How much?" He told her. It was a number she had to count twice in her head before it sat still. It was a number larger than the entire estate her father had failed to leave her. It was larger than anything she had ever heard a person speak aloud at a supper table, and the man across from her said it the way another man might tell you the price of a coat. You would do that. I would. I would do it because the men can be replaced if they don't die first, and the cattle can be bought again if we have the house and the barns to bring them back to. The land does not run if the buildings stand. The land runs if the buildings burn. He sat back. I have been ranching in this country for 9 years on my own, miss. I have watched 2 fires take 2 ranches in this territory. The ones who fought them on every front lost everything. The ones who let some burn so they could fight for the rest kept the rest. That is the only thing I know about fire that is worth knowing. She was quiet for a long time. She was thinking about her father. Her father had had 100 acres of bad clay in Pennsylvania, and 4 bad years in a row, and 1 good cow, and a piece of bottom land by a creek that flooded every spring and washed half the topsoil from the upper field into the lower one. He had been a stubborn man, and not a clever one, and he had lost the place eventually, but he had not lost it the way Caleb Grayson was describing losing this place. He had lost it slow. The summer she was 16, there had been a brush fire in the woodlot above the upper field. It had not been a big fire by Wyoming standards. It would have been laughable here. But it had come down the hill toward the barn, and her father had been alone in the field, and the hired man had been gone to town, and her mother had been sick in bed in the house, and Evelyn had been the only person within shouting distance who could ride. She had ridden into the village. She had not gone for the men. She had gone for the priest's 2 sons, because the priest's 2 sons had been the ones who, the year before, had helped Mr. Hewitt dig a long, shallow trench around a haystack that had caught from a lightning strike, and she had remembered, in the panic of the morning, that they had told her about the trench afterward over a glass of cold buttermilk in their mother's kitchen. What she remembered, riding back from the village with the boys and 3 other men, was the trench. She remembered the wet sacks. She remembered that her father had stopped trying to stamp out the flames and started, on instruction, to dig. She remembered the way the fire had come up to the trench and run along it and tried to find a way across, the way a hungry dog tries to find a way around a fence, and how it had not, in the end, found one. They had lost 3 acres of woodlot. They had not lost the barn. She had been 16 years old, and she had remembered every year of her life since the look on her father's face when the men had walked away that evening and he had stood at the edge of the burned woodlot with his hat in his hand. He had not cried. He had said very quiet, "You did good, daughter. You did good." And then he had gone in to sit with her mother. She had been thinking about her father for half a minute, maybe a minute, at the supper table. Caleb had not interrupted her. He had a way of letting a silence go on as long as it needed to. She set her cup down. Caleb, he looked up sharp. It was the first time she had used his name. He had not asked her to. He had not invited her to. She had been Miss Mercer for 4 months, and he had been Mr. Grayson, and the distance between those 2 names had been part of the long, careful aisle he had been keeping clear for her, and she had walked over it just now without meaning to, and without taking it back. Yes. Do not let the south pasture burn. He did not answer. Do not turn the cattle loose. Miss, listen to me. Listen all the way through. I am not telling you to fight the fire on every front. I am telling you not to fight it on the wrong front. She got up from the table. She walked around it. She stood across from him with her hands flat on the wood, the way she had seen him stand at his own desk 100 times, and she leaned in. When the fire comes, it will come up the south draw. You said so. Sam said so. Everybody on this place who is not a fool has been saying so for a month. The south draw is a chimney. It will pull the fire up into the home pasture in an hour, and the home pasture is dry as paper, yes? Yes. And the home pasture sits in the bowl. The bowl is the worst place to fight, because the wind eddies and you cannot predict where the flames will jump, yes? Yes. So you do not fight in the bowl. You fight at the top of the draw. You put a break across the mouth of the draw before the fire ever gets to the home pasture. You make the draw fight itself. With what, miss? We do not have 100 men with shovels. You have 18 men. You have the Aldridge place. You have the Fry place if Fry is not already dead. You have every smallholder between here and the river who is going to lose everything if your ranch burns because their cattle graze your back pastures all summer and their wives sell eggs at your kitchen door. You have ditches that already run from the creek to the home pasture for the watering. You have horses. You have plows. 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 You break the ground all the way across the mouth of the draw. You break it 8 rows deep. You burn the grass off the broken ground at midnight while the wind is down, with men on every side with wet sacks. You make a black scar 100 yards wide across the throat of the draw, and when the wildfire comes up, the draw it gets to the scar, and it has nothing to eat, and it walks itself out. That is how you do it. That is how my father saved his barn from a fire that was coming down a wooded hill above his upper field when I was 16 years old. Your father. My father. Who lost everything else he ever owned, Caleb. But he did not lose the barn that summer because he listened to 2 boys from the village who had read about controlled burns in an almanac, and he did the work, and he saved the barn. He kept the barn until the day the bank took the rest of it out from under him for unpaid debt 11 years later. The barn was not what killed us. The barn was the only thing my father ever beat. She did not know, until she had finished saying it, that she had been crying. The tears had come down her face quiet, the way they do when a person is too tired to make a sound about it. She wiped them off with the back of her hand, and she kept her hand on the table. Caleb did not move. He looked at her for a long, long time, and then he looked at the window, and then he looked at his hands, and when he looked back at her, his face was different from any face she had seen him wear in 4 months. It was the face of a man who had been told something he had not heard before, and had not, until that minute, known he was waiting to hear. "Sit down," he said quietly. "Please." She sat. "Tell it to me again, slow, from the start." She told it again. He listened. He did not interrupt. When she got to the part about the controlled burn at midnight, he stopped her once to ask about the wind, and she told him about wind, and he nodded and said, "Go on." When she had finished, he sat for a moment looking at nothing, and then he got up and went to the door and called for Henry, and Henry came, hat in hand, and Caleb said, "Get Sam, get every man on the place, in the office in 10 minutes. And Henry, who had been with him 4 years and had never been spoken to like that, said only, "Yes, sir," and went. Caleb turned back to her. "You will come too." "Caleb, I am not a man," and they, "You will come too. You will stand at the map, and you will tell them what you told me. If they do not like hearing it from a woman, they will hear it anyway, because the alternative is what I was going to do, which was to give up half this ranch without a fight. You will come." She came. She stood in his office, which she had been inside maybe 4 times in 4 months, with 18 ranch hands packed shoulder to shoulder around a long oak table on which Caleb had unrolled a hand-drawn map of the valley. And she pointed with her finger at the mouth of the south draw, and she told them, in a voice that did not shake because she would not let it, what she had told him at the supper table. The men listened. Some of them watched Caleb to see if Caleb would correct her. Caleb did not. Sam stood at the back of the room with his arms folded and his mustache moving the way it moved when he was thinking. And when she finished, he said the one word, "Yes." And after that, nobody argued. By the next morning, Caleb had 3 riders out, one to the Aldridges, one to the Frys, one to every smallholder in a 20-mile circle. By the next afternoon, there were 40 men on the ranch who did not belong to the ranch, and there were 8 plows in the south draw, and Evelyn was riding the line of the cut showing a man twice her age where she wanted the next furrow turned, and the man twice her age, who happened to be one of Beulah Aldridge's hired hands sent over against Beulah Aldridge's stated wishes because the Aldridge foreman had quietly overruled her, was nodding and turning his team without a word of complaint. The fire came on the 4th day. It came in the late afternoon, the way Sam had said it would, up out of the south country on a wind that had been building since dawn. They saw the smoke first, a thin gray smear above the southern ridge that thickened in the space of an hour into a brown wall the height of a mountain. The cattle in the south pasture went silent, not lowing, not moving, just standing with their heads up and their nostrils flared, the way cattle do when they smell a thing older than they are. The horses in the home corral began to scream. Caleb did not waste a second. He had the cattle moving north before the first ember crossed the ridge. He had every man at his post. He had set Henry and 3 riders at the western end of the break, and Sam and 4 at the eastern end, and he had taken the middle himself with the wettest sacks and the deepest trench. And he had sent Evelyn, over her flat refusal, which he had overridden by saying, the only time he had ever raised his voice at her, "You are the only person on this place who has done this before, and I need you where I can find you." To the highest point above the draw, with a fast horse and a clear view of the wind, to ride down and tell the men at any point along the line which way the flames were running and where to throw the sacks next. It came up the draw with a sound she would dream about until she was an old woman. It was not a roar. A roar was what people called it afterward, in the stories. What it was a long, dry, low breathing, the way a furnace breathes when its door is open, magnified to the size of a valley. The brown wall of smoke went black. The ridges that had been a mile away disappeared. Ash began to fall on her shoulders like dirty snow. The horse under her shifted from foot to foot and did not bolt, because she had bought him with her hand on his neck for an hour at the corral the night before, and he had decided she was a person who could be trusted, which was, she thought wildly, more than most people had decided about her in her life. The flames came up the draw. They came up the draw, and they met the scar. She saw it from above, saw the first arms of fire reach across the burned ground and find nothing, and pull back, and reach again, and pull back again. She saw a tongue of flame leap 15 feet across the break on a gust and catch a clump of grass on the far side, and she saw Henry's 3 men converge on that clump from 3 directions before she had finished drawing breath, and she saw them beat it out and beat it out and beat it out until there was nothing of it left but a black wet smear on the ground. She saw Caleb. He was at the center of the line where she had put him, and his shirt was off because his shirt was on fire on the back of it from an ember, and his face was black with soot, and his hair was singed at the ends, and he was swinging a wet sack the way a man swings a sledgehammer, and he was screaming at his men, screaming, the only time she had ever heard him raise his voice for any reason at all, screaming, "Hold it! Hold it! Hold the goddamn line!" They held the line. They held it through the afternoon and they held it through the evening, and at some point in the night, with the moon a sick orange disk behind the smoke, she rode down from her hilltop because the wind had shifted and she could not see the line anymore. And she went to the middle of it where Caleb was, and she got off her horse, and she picked up a sack out of a bucket, and she stood beside him and beat the line with him for the next 3 hours, without either of them speaking a word. The wind broke just before dawn. It did not stop. It eased. It came down from a wind that could throw an ember across 100 yards to a wind that could not throw one across 10. The fire, which had been a wall, became a low, sullen line of orange creeping along the south face of the scar, looking for a way through. There was no way through. By the time the sun came up gray and red through the smoke, the worst of it was past. There were still small fires in the burnt-over country to the south. There were still men with sacks. There were still horses being walked, exhausted, in slow circles to cool them down. But the scar had held. The home pasture was still green where it was green. The barns were standing. The house, 2 miles off and untouched, was a dim white shape through the haze that the men, when they noticed it, did not look at directly, the way you do not look directly at something you have been afraid of losing. Evelyn was sitting on the ground. She did not remember sitting down. Her hands were black. Her dress, which had been one of her 2 shirtwaists and a riding skirt borrowed from Mrs. Halloran's daughter, was burned along the hem in 3 places and would never come clean. Her hair had come down somewhere in the night and was hanging in a long dark snarl over her shoulder. She was breathing in shallow, ragged pulls because her lungs had been full of smoke for so long they had forgotten how to take a deep breath. Caleb came over. He sat down beside her. He did not sit close. He sat about 3 feet away. He had put his shirt back on at some point, or somebody had put one on him. She could not tell whose it was. His face was unrecognizable under the soot, except for the pale tracks where sweat had run down it through the dirt. He looked at her. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, in a voice so quiet she had to lean toward him to hear it, "We did not lose the south pasture." "No." "We did not lose 1 steer." "No." "There's a man at the east end of the line, Fry's man, who would be dead if you had not ridden down off the hill and told us the wind had shifted, because the wind shifted toward him at 3 o'clock in the morning, and we did not see it from the middle. You saw it." "I saw it." "I do not know what to say to you, Evelyn." It was the first time he had used her given name. She turned her head to look at him. Her neck hurt. Everything hurt. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face, and which she could not have named, but which she understood, all the way down through the ache and the smoke and the exhaustion, was the expression of a man who had finally been seen by another person without any of the things he owned standing in between them. She did not say anything. She put her black, blistered hand down flat on the ground between them, palm up, in the dirt. After a long moment, he put his hand into it. They sat like that, not speaking, while the sun came up the rest of the way and the smoke began, finally, to lift off the valley. And somewhere on the ridge above them, a man whose name she did not know was singing, very softly and very badly. A song she had never heard, because he was alive and the sun was up and the line had held. They sat there a long time before anybody came to get them. It was Henry who came finally, walking down the line of the scar with his hat in his hand and the brim crushed flat from being gripped wet for too many hours. He stopped a few feet off when he saw them, the way a man stops when he comes around a corner and almost interrupts something private. He looked at Caleb, he looked at Evelyn, he looked at the ground. Mr. Grayson. Caleb did not let go of her hand. He turned his head, slow, like a man whose neck had locked. Henry, Sam says the line's done. He's pulling the men in for water. He says you ought to come, because if you don't come, the men are going to wait for you, and they don't have any weight left in them. All right. Mrs. Halloran's down at the bunkhouse with the wagons. She brought water and bread and a good deal of whiskey. She is asking after Miss Mercer. Evelyn turned her head. Tell her I'm coming. Yes, ma'am. Henry hesitated. He was looking at her openly, the way he had not looked at her in months. There was something in his young, sunburned, freckled face that she did not at first recognize, and then she did, and it surprised her so much she almost laughed. He was looking at her the way a man looks at somebody who has just become, in the space of a night, a person he is going to tell stories about for the rest of his life. Ma'am. Yes, Henry. That was something. Go on, Henry. Yes, ma'am. He went. They watched him walk back up the line, and his shoulders, which had been carrying a great deal for a long time, came down a little with every step he took away from the scar, like a man setting down a load by inches. Caleb stood up first. He did it the way an older man stands up, in two parts, with his hand braced on his knee. He gave her his other hand, and she took it and came up off the ground, and the world tilted, and she leaned against him for one short second before her balance came back, and he steadied her without making a thing of it, and then he took half a step back to give her the room he always gave her, and she did not this time want it. She did not say so. They walked down the line toward the wagons. What met them at the bunkhouse was not the orderly homecoming she had pictured in the last black hour of the night. It was a wreck. Men were sitting on the bunkhouse steps with their boots off and their feet bleeding through their socks. A horse was being walked in a circle at the corral, with foam at the corner of its mouth and a long, shallow burn on its flank that somebody was painting carefully with grease. Sam was at the water barrel, drinking from the dipper, and when she looked at him, she saw he was crying, quietly, without sound, the way a man cries who has not done it in 20 years and is surprised by his own face. Mrs. Halloran was moving through it all with a flat tin tray of biscuits and slabs of cold ham and a kettle of coffee balanced against her hip. And she was handing food to grown men who were not embarrassed to take it from her hands like children, because they were past being embarrassed by anything. Mrs. Halloran saw Evelyn and stopped. She set the tray down on a barrel without looking at it. She walked across the yard. She did not say a word. She put her arms around Evelyn and held her, hard, and she smelled of wood smoke and bread and the dry, sweet smell of bay leaves. She carried in the pocket of her apron, and Evelyn, who had been doing very well, who had been holding it together in front of 40 strange men and the man who had finally said her name, broke open against the housekeeper's shoulder and cried. She cried for a long time. Mrs. Halloran did not shush her. She did not pat her on the back. She did not say, "There, there." She stood in the yard with her arms around the woman she had been waiting on for 4 months, and she let her cry, the way she would have let her sleep or eat or breathe, like a thing the body needed and would be done with when it was done. When Evelyn was done, the housekeeper let go of her and stepped back and held her at arm's length and looked at her. "Miss Mercer, Mrs. Halloran, you'll come up to the house now. There's a bath drawn. There's a hot meal coming. I will put you in your bed, and you will sleep until I come and wake you up, and you will not argue. All right. And Mr. Grayson." Caleb was standing a few feet off, watching them. He had his hat off. His face was still half black with soot, But he had washed his hands at some point, badly, and the line of cleanness ended at his wrists like an old man's cuffs. "Yes, Mrs. Halloran, you will come up to the house too. You will not stand out here and do the figures with Sam for the next 4 hours. You will come up to the house and you will sit down at the table and you will eat what I put in front of you, and after that you will sleep in a bed, like a person." "Yes, Mrs. Halloran. And then in the morning you will do whatever it is you need to do." She paused. She looked between the two of them. "And before any of that, both of you, there is a man in the kitchen waiting to talk to you, Fry himself. He rode in an hour ago. He is in a state and he will not be sent away." Fry. Fry. Caleb looked at Evelyn. He let her decide. After a moment she nodded. "Tell him we'll come." They washed their faces at the pump and walked up the long slope to the house with Mrs. Halloran ahead of them. The house, when it came up out of the haze, looked unreasonably whole. Pale stone, pale timber, the same long porch she had walked up 4 months before. It looked in the dirty morning light almost ridiculous, like a thing that should not have survived. Fry was at the kitchen table. He was a small, wiry man of about 60, with a face like saddle leather and one bad eye, and he had been crying, and he was not pretending otherwise. He had a tin cup of coffee in front of him that he had not touched. He stood up when they came in. He stood up the way a soldier stands up when an officer enters a room. "Mr. Grayson?" "Fry." "Miss." "Mr. Fry." Fry looked at Caleb. He opened his mouth and closed it. He tried again. "I lost my barn," he said finally. 2 weeks ago. I came over here on Tuesday because I had nowhere else to go, and I owed you for the hay last winter, and I thought you were going to put me off the place. I sent Tom because I could not face you myself. You sent him back with a man and 4 horses, and you told him to bring his boys to the line. Yes. You did not have to do that, Mr. Grayson. I did, Fry. I needed every man. You did not need my boys. My boys are not hands. My oldest is 12. You put him at the west end of the line with a wet sack, and you told him to watch the wind on the cottonwood, and that boy stood there for 10 hours, and the line did not break at the cottonwood. He came home with his hands burnt to the second knuckle, and he could not stop talking. He talked all the way home. He has never talked like that in his life. He said, Fry stopped. He scrubbed at his face with the heel of his hand. He said you had a woman on a horse on the hill. He said she rode down the line every hour and told the men where to throw the next sack. He said she came down at 3 o'clock in the morning and told them the wind had turned, and that was how he kept his side of the cottonwood from going. My boy said that, Mr. Grayson. About a woman. He is 12. He turned to Evelyn. Miss Mercer. Mr. Fry. I owe you my boy's life. You do not, Mr. Fry. I do. I am telling you I do. You will not argue me out of it. I have nothing to give you because I have nothing to give anyone. But I'm telling you, miss, that there is a man in this country now who owes you a thing he cannot pay, and there are not many of those, and you will remember me when you need one. He sat down heavily. He picked up the coffee cup at last, with a hand that was shaking. He drank. Evelyn stood at the table and did not know what to say. She had not in 28 years had a man speak to her like that. The men in Philadelphia had spoken to her politely while she had money, and not at all when she did not. Her father had spoken to her with love, in the only way he knew how to speak to anyone, in small jokes and small worries. The men at the ranch had spoken to her like a curiosity that had become eventually a fixture. Nobody had spoken to her the way a man with a 12-year-old son and a burned barn spoke to her at that kitchen table. She put her hand on his shoulder. Drink your coffee, Mr. Fry. He drank his coffee. By the 3rd day after the fire, the wagons started coming. They came from every direction. They came from the Aldridge place, from the Fry place, from the smallholders along the river, from people they had never met whose ranches lay 60 miles downwind and who would have lost everything they owned if the fire had crossed the scar. They came with hams. They came with sacks of flour and small wooden crates of eggs packed in straw. They came with a milk cow tied to the back of a wagon, a gift from a widow named Mott, whom Evelyn had never heard of, and who, Mrs. Halloran told her quietly, had been a friend of Caleb's mother in the early years, and had not set foot on the Grayson place since the day Caleb's mother was buried. Mrs. Mott climbed down from her wagon, stiff and slow, with 2 granddaughters holding her elbows, and she walked across the yard with her chin up, and she said to Caleb at the porch step, Your mother would have been proud of you, son. She would have been prouder of your wife. And she had handed him the lead rope of the cow and turned around without waiting for an answer and gotten back into her wagon and gone. Caleb stood on the porch holding the cow's lead rope and looking after the wagon for a long time before he said, very low, only to Evelyn, "She has not spoken my name in 14 years. Evelyn did not answer. She put her hand against the small of his back where Mrs. Halloran could not see from the doorway, and she left it there a moment, and she went inside. The Aldridge wagon came on the 5th day. It was not Beulah who drove it. It was Cora. She came alone. She drove a small light buckboard with one horse, and she stopped it at the foot of the porch steps, and she climbed down by herself, and she stood at the bottom of the steps with her gloved hands folded in front of her, and she did not climb up. Evelyn came out onto the porch. It was the first time the two of them had been in the same place without Beulah Aldridge between them. Cora looked smaller without her mother, less arranged. She had not quite the face Evelyn had remembered. The eyes that had taken inventory across the dining room 4 months ago were red around the rims, as though she had not been sleeping, and her mouth was not the practiced small mouth of a girl with a knife in her voice. It was a tired mouth. "Miss Mercer." "Miss Aldridge, may I speak with you?" "Yes." "Privately." Evelyn looked at the door behind her. Mrs. Halloran was somewhere in the hall, on principle, where she could be at the porch in 2 strides if a thing was needed. Caleb was at the bunkhouse with Sam doing some accounting that had to be done before another day went by, because the dead and surviving cattle had to be counted before the buyer's man came from Cheyenne. There was nobody to see them. There was nobody to overhear. She came down the steps. "There is a bench under the cottonwood," she said. "Thank you." They sat on the bench. Cora did not speak at first. She sat with her gloved hands in her lap, and she looked at the place where the cottonwood's roots came up out of the ground in long, pale knuckles. She had a small lace handkerchief in her hand. She turned it once. She turned it twice. "I was not going to come," she said. "My mother told me not to come. She said it would look like a concession." "What would it look like to not come?" "It would look like nothing at all, which is what my mother prefers. She prefers things to look like nothing at all. She has spent 6 years arranging things to look like nothing at all." Cora paused. She looked up. Her eyes were not the eyes of a card player anymore. They were a young woman's eyes, and they were full of something Evelyn could not at first name and then realized with a small shock was shame. "Miss Mercer." "Yes. I have been very unkind to you." "You have been polite to me." "Politeness from a woman like my mother is unkindness. You know that. Don't pretend you don't." Evelyn did not answer. "I broke off my engagement to Mr. Grayson 6 years ago," Cora said. "I am not going to lie to you about why. My mother has told the territory I broke it off because of the dining room. I did not break it off because of the dining room. I broke it off because I was 20 years old and I was frightened of him." "He was not frightening, Miss Mercer. That is what I want you to understand. He was the kindest man I had been near in my life up to that minute. I had been raised by my mother to think kindness in a man was weakness, and I looked at this very kind man, and I thought, this man is going to be devoured by my mother and her friends and the women in this country, and I am going to have to sit in his dining room for 40 years and watch it happen. And I could not bear that thought. So I told him I would not marry him, and I told him it was because he would not move the dining room, because I knew that would hurt him in a small way and not a large one. I was a coward, Miss Mercer. I want you to know I know that." Evelyn watched her. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because my mother has spent 4 months telling everyone in this country that you are an opportunist and a Philadelphia adventuress, and a woman who married for the house. And then you stood on a hill for a night and a morning, and you saved the country. And the men who came home to my mother's table told her in front of me what you had done. And my mother said, she said, well, she is more clever than I gave her credit for. She said it just like that, as if you had won a hand of cards." Cora's voice did not rise. It got very small. "I do not want to be my mother, Miss Mercer. I do not want to die being my mother. I came over here because I wanted to tell you, where my mother could not hear, that I am sorry. For what I did 6 years ago, and for what she has been doing since. And I am asking you, if you will, to let me come over sometimes. Not as her daughter, just as myself. I do not have any women friends in this country who are not afraid of her. I would like one." She was crying by the time she finished. not loudly, the way a woman cries who has been raised never to cry where anyone can see. Evelyn sat very still. She thought of a great many things she could say. She thought of saying, "Your mother insulted me at your own table the morning after my arrival, and your hired man came over to plow our break against her orders, and I would not have wanted to be 20 and engaged to a kind man with your mother in my parlor, either." She thought about her own mother, who had been a small, gentle woman with a long illness, and who had said to Evelyn once, in the last summer of her life, "Daughter, you will meet hard women in your time, and most of them were not hard to start with. Try to remember that." She put her hand over Cora Aldridge's gloved hand on the bench. "Come over on Thursdays," she said. "After dinner. Mrs. Halloran makes a cake on Thursdays. It is too much cake for two of us." Cora made a small sound that was half a laugh and half something else. "Thank you." "You are welcome." "And Miss Mercer." "Yes, he was never anything but kind to me. I do not want you to think otherwise. If he has been careful with you, it is not because he does not, it is because of me, because I was the last one. And I broke something in him, and I have known it for 6 years, and I have not had the courage to say so to anyone. I am saying so now. I am saying so to you because you are the one who has to live with what I did." Evelyn looked at her. She thought very clearly, "This is the thing I needed to know, and I would not have known it without her, and I do not want to be a woman who refuses what she is being given because of the pride of who is giving it. Thank you, Miss Aldridge." "Cora." "Thank you, Cora." Cora got up and walked back to her buckboard, and her shoulders were down, the way Henry's had been down walking away from the scar, and she drove out of the yard without looking back, and the bench under the cottonwood was empty again, and the wind moved the leaves, and somewhere a dog barked once, lazily, at a wagon track that nobody was on. Evelyn sat there a long time. She found Caleb after supper. He was in the office. He had not lit the lamp. He was sitting in the chair by the window with his feet on the sill, and the moon was coming up over the ridge, and the room was full of that pale, grainy light that the moon makes when it has just risen and is still half orange from the dust. He turned his head when she came in. He did not get up. He had stopped getting up for her months ago, after she had asked him once, exasperated, please not to, that it was not a parlor, and she was not a guest, and he had taken her at her word the way he took her at every word. "Caleb." "Evelyn." He had been saying her name since the morning at the scar. He still said it carefully, like a thing he had been given that he was not yet sure he was allowed to keep. "I want to tell you what I am going to do." He went still. "All right. I'm going to marry you." He did not answer at first. He turned his face back to the window, and for a moment she thought she had hurt him in some way she could not see. Then she understood. He could not look at her. He could not look at her in the moonlight at the window, because if he looked at her, his face was going to do something that he had not let his face do in front of another person in a long time, and he was buying himself a second to put it away. She did not give him the second. She crossed the room. She came right up to the chair. She did not stop at 10 feet. She stopped at the arm of his chair, where there was no distance left at all. "Look at me, Caleb." He looked at her. His eyes were wet. He did not cry. He did not let the wetness go any further than the lower lid. But he did not turn away either, and she gave him credit, all her life afterward, for that. "I'm not marrying you because of the house." "I know." "I'm not marrying you because of the land." "I know. I almost left the morning after the ridge. I had my hand on the trunk. Mrs. Halloran was at the door. I had decided I would take whatever money you gave me, and I would go to Denver, and I would teach in a school until I died. And I would never write to anybody from Philadelphia again, because there was nobody left there to write to. I had decided. Then I went to the window, and I looked at this country, and I thought, the man who lied to me about this country lied to me because he had been so badly used by everyone who saw it that he could not imagine being seen any other way. And I thought, Caleb, I have been so badly used by everyone who saw me that I might be the only woman in this territory who understands what he did. And I did not unpack the trunk that morning because of you. I unpacked it because of me, because I recognized you. And I was tired of being a woman who walked away from things she recognized. She paused. I am telling you this so you will not spend the next 40 years thinking I did it for some other reason. I want it said plain, and I want it said by me, and I want you to remember every word of it, because I am not the kind of woman who repeats herself, Caleb Grayson, and you will get this speech once." He laughed. It came out of him strange, half a laugh and half a small, shocked sound, as though somebody had stepped on his foot. He put his hand over his eyes. "Evelyn." "Yes." "You will get it back." "What?" "The speech. You will get it back when I tell my version. You are not the only one with a speech. I've been working on mine since the morning at the Scar. I will give it to you, and you will sit and listen the whole way through, and you will not interrupt me. Do you understand?" "Yes." "All right." He took his hand off his eyes. He looked at her. He was smiling, so small, uneven, exhausted, and entirely without the careful arrangement he had been wearing for 4 months. "But not tonight. I am too tired tonight. I will give it to you tomorrow." "Caleb." "Yes." "Tomorrow." "Tomorrow." She put her hand on the back of the chair beside his head. She had been on a horse on a hill for a night and a morning. She had been in a smoke-filled valley for 3 days after. She had sat on a bench under a cottonwood with a young woman who had finally told her the truth about the man in this chair. She had come up to the chair in the moonlight, expecting to deliver an announcement, and what she had delivered, she understood now, was the smaller half of a long conversation that was going to take the rest of her life to finish. She bent down. She kissed him. She kissed him once, on the mouth, briefly, the way a woman kisses a man whose name she has finally said out loud, and who is, as of this moment, no longer somebody she is going to leave. When she straightened up, his eyes were closed. "All right," she said quietly. "Tomorrow." She went out and shut the door behind her. In the hall, she met Mrs. Halloran, who was carrying a lamp with the shade tipped down so that the light went only on the floor, and who looked up at her once and did not ask, and only said, very dry, "I will move your things into the larger room in the morning then, Miss Mercer," and went on by her down the hall as if nothing in the world had changed. Evelyn stood at the head of the stairs in the dark and listened to the housekeeper's footsteps go down to the kitchen, and she put her hand on the banister and she found, with some surprise, that she was smiling. Tomorrow came the way it does on a ranch, which is to say it came before anyone was ready for it, with the bunkhouse rooster making its bad-tempered noise at the kitchen window, and Mrs. Halloran already up and at the stove with her sleeves rolled to the elbow. Evelyn came down the stairs and into the kitchen in a dress she had not worn since Philadelphia, the dark green wool with the small buttons, the only thing she still owned that had not been ruined by smoke or sun, and Mrs. Halloran looked at her once across the room and did not say anything about the dress. The housekeeper poured her a cup of coffee and pushed it across the table with 2 fingers and went back to the stove, and Evelyn drank the coffee standing up at the window, watching the men move slow across the yard in the gray light, and waiting. Caleb came in from the office at the back of the house. He had not slept much. She could see it in the way he held his shoulders, in the new line between his eyes that had not been there a week ago. He had washed and shaved and put on a clean shirt, and he had combed his hair flat against his head the way a man combs it when he is going to do a thing he has been turning over in his mind for half the night. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. "Evelyn." "Caleb, there is a man coming this morning from Cheyenne, the buyer's man, about the cattle count. He will be here by 10. "All right. Before he gets here, I would like—" He stopped. He looked at Mrs. Halloran, who had her back to them, and who was very deliberately not turning around, and he looked at the window, and he looked at the floor. "I would like to walk down to the creek with you, if you have an hour." "I have an hour." "All right." They went out through the kitchen door and around the side of the house, and down through the home pasture toward the creek. The grass was wet to the knees with dew. The cottonwoods along the bank were just beginning to turn at the tips of their highest leaves. It was not autumn yet, not really, but the country had felt the change 3 nights ago and was already getting ready. They walked without speaking until they came to a place where the bank dropped a little, and there was a flat stone big enough for 2 people to sit on. Caleb had cleared the stone of leaves with his hand, she noticed, some time earlier. There was a small pile of yellow leaves to one side of it that had not blown there on their own. He sat. She sat beside him. He sat closer than he ever had, not against her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his arm through her sleeve. "You said last night you would let me give you the speech." "I said I would. I have been writing it in my head for a long time, since before you came. I started writing it the morning I got your first letter, which I have in the desk drawer in the office, in case you ever want to know what it sounded like coming from a stranger." He paused. I'm going to give it to you now. It will not be a good speech, Evelyn. I'm not a man who is good with prepared words. I would rather break a horse than make a toast, but I want you to have it anyway. Will you let me? Yes. He took a breath. My father built that house, he said, the year I was born. He built it because my mother said she would not raise a child in a soddy, and he loved my mother more than he loved sense, and he built her a house too big for the country and almost too big for the money. He almost broke us building it. He used to walk through the rooms when I was small and look at them like a man counting his ribs, like he was sure something would be missing if he stopped counting. He died in that house when I was 26, and I have been counting the rooms after him ever since. I did not want this place, Evelyn. I want you to know that. I've never said it out loud. I am saying it to you. When my father died, I sat on the porch the night of the funeral, and I thought about selling every acre and going to the coast and being a man who fishes for a living, who comes home with cut hands and no land at all. I thought about it for 3 weeks, and then on the 3rd week, one of my mother's friends, Mrs. Mott, you met her, she brought the cow. Mrs. Mott came over and she sat on that porch with me, and she said, Caleb, your father built this for your mother, and your mother lived in it for 4 years before she died, and the rest of his life he was building it for you. If you sell it, you are telling him he was wrong to do that, and you have not earned the right to tell him that yet. Earn it first, then do whatever you want. And she got up, and she walked off the porch, and she did not come back for 14 years. And I stayed because of her, not because of him, not because of the land, because an old woman told me I had not earned the right to leave. He stopped. He looked at the creek. I have spent 14 years trying to earn it. I have spent 14 years putting up fence and buying cows and reading land law and learning to be the kind of man who can hold what was given to him without being eaten by it. I have done it. I know I have done it because Mrs. Mott came back. She would not have come if I had not done it. She told me when she handed me that cow that my mother would have been proud of me. She told me my mother would have been prouder of my wife. She said, wife, Evelyn. I had not asked her yet. I had not asked you yet either. I know. You know. I knew the second she said it. All right. He laughed, that same small laugh from the night before, the one that came out of him like a thing being knocked loose. All right. So you have always been 3 steps ahead of me. I am not surprised by that. Go on with the speech. Yes. He took another breath. He turned finally and looked at her. What I want to say to you, Evelyn Mercer, is this. I have not, in my whole life, been chosen. I have been picked over. I have been calculated. I have been the answer to other people's questions. The woman who came before you, the second one, wrote me a note about my barn before she went. I have told you that. I did not tell you what else she wrote. She wrote that I was a good prospect. She wrote those exact words. A good prospect. I have carried that piece of paper in the back of the office desk for 6 years, and I take it out about once a year, and I look at it, because I am a man who likes to be reminded of what kind of fool he was at 30, so that he does not become the same kind of fool at 35. I lied to you in those letters because I had decided I would rather have a woman come out here and hate me for what I owned than come out here and want me for it. I told myself it was caution. It was not caution. It was anger. I was angry at the woman who wrote Good Prospect. I was angry at Cora Aldridge, who I do not blame, by the way, for what she did. I have forgiven her for it long since. She did me a favor she did not know she was doing, but I was angry at her then. I was angry at my father for building a house I had to live in. I was angry at my mother for dying before she could tell me what to do with it. I have been angry, Evelyn, for a long time. I have been angry under a calm face, which is the worst way to be angry, because nobody can talk you out of it, including yourself. And then you came up the road on a stagecoach driver who would not bring you the last 6 miles, and you sat on a trunk in the dust for 2 hours waiting for me, and I was already half a mile off watching you through a spyglass because I was afraid you would be gone by the time I got there, and you did not get up off the trunk. You sat there. You did not pace. You did not cry. You read a packet of letters and you put them away, and you looked at the road. I watched you, Evelyn. I watched you for almost half an hour through that spyglass, and I thought, that woman is going to hate me when she sees the house, and I am going to deserve it, and I am going to ride up to her anyway, because I would rather be hated by a woman who sat on her trunk like that than be loved by a woman who would have made a scene. And then I rode up to you, and you were every bit as fierce as I had hoped, and you got on the horse, and you came up the ridge with me, and you saw the house, and you turned in the saddle, and you told me what you thought of me, and what you thought of me was the most exact and accurate description of my life that any person had ever given me. And I want you to know that the night I sat in the office after you went to bed and looked at the dark glass of the window, what I was thinking about was not the lie. It was that a woman had come 2,000 miles, and the first thing she had done was see me. Not the house, not the land, the man inside both. Wrong, Evelyn. She had seen me wrong. She had thought I was a coward, and I was. But she had seen me. And nobody had done that since my mother was alive. He stopped. His voice had gone hoarse. He cleared it. I will not lie to you again. About anything. Not about money, not about the past, not about Cora, not about what is in the office drawer. I will not be careful with you the way I have been careful with you. I have been careful with you because I was afraid of you leaving. I am still afraid of you leaving. I will probably be afraid of you leaving until the day I am put in the ground. But I am not going to let that fear run my house anymore, Evelyn. I am not going to make you live in a house run by a man's fear. My mother lived in one. She lived 4 years in one. I will not do it to you. Do you understand me? Yes. The speech is almost done. There is one more part. All right. I have been working with the carpenter on the bunkhouse extension since June. You knew about the extension. What you did not know is that I told him in July to put the door on the north side instead of the east, because I was thinking, before the fire, that we were going to have to take in more men this year, and I was thinking that if we took in more men, we were going to need a place for their families. I was thinking about families, Evelyn, before I had asked you anything. I was thinking about children at this table. He looked at her. I'm going to ask you about that someday. Not today. Not next month. But I'm going to ask, and I want you to know, ahead of the asking, that I have been thinking about it, and that if your answer is no, I will not love you any less for it. And if your answer is yes, I will not love you any more for it either. The math is finished. I love you, and the rest is just what we decide to do with the love. Do you understand? She did not trust her voice for a moment. Yes. All right. He looked back at the creek. That is the speech. It was not a good one. I told you it would not be. It was a fine speech, Caleb. It was not. It was. He shook his head. He laughed again, that broken loose laugh, and he sat there with his hands hanging between his knees and the morning sun coming over the cottonwood and putting one yellow stripe across his face, and he looked, in that minute, like a man 12 years younger than the man who had ridden up to her at the crossroads in May. He looked like a man who had set down a thing he had been carrying since he was 26. She put her hand on his knee. Caleb. Yes, I will marry you in October, before the snow. I would like Mrs. Halloran to bake the cake. I would like Henry to stand up with you. I would like Sam to give me away because there is no one in this country who could give me away who would mean it more, and because I think he would cry, and I think he ought to be allowed to. I would like Cora Aldridge to come without her mother. I would like Mrs. Mott to sit in the front row in whatever chair we have that has the best back support. I would like the supper to be at the long table, and I would like every hand on this place at it, with their hats off and their elbows wherever they want them, because they are the men who held the line, and I do not give a damn about the etiquette of seating. Will that suit you? Yes, he said. That will suit me. All right. All right. She squeezed his knee. He covered her hand with his. They did not say anything else for a long time. The creek ran in front of them, and somewhere up at the house a door slammed, and Mrs. Halloran's voice came across the pasture, faint, calling Henry about something, and Henry's voice answered, and the world went on, the way the world goes on around two people who have just decided something, indifferent and busy and forgiving. They were married in the 3rd week of October, before the first hard snow. The wedding was the way she had asked for it. Mrs. Halloran baked the cake, 3 layers of it, a thing she had not done since the previous Mrs. Grayson had been a bride, and she did it with the kind of quiet ferocity that comes out of women who have been waiting 23 years to bake a particular cake. Henry stood up beside Caleb in a borrowed coat that was a half-inch too short in the sleeves, and he did not stop blushing the entire morning. Sam walked Evelyn down the long center hall of the house with her hand on his elbow, and he did not cry until she let go of him at the parlor doorway, and then he turned away fast so the men at the back of the room would not see. and Mrs. Halloran handed him a clean handkerchief without looking at him and went on serving punch. Cora Aldridge came without her mother. She sat in the third row. She wore a dress the color of a spring sky, and she had cut her hair short, in a way her mother would have hated, and when Evelyn came past her on the way to the front, she squeezed Evelyn's hand once, hard and quick, like a person sending a coded message, and let her go. Mrs. Mott sat in the front row in the wing chair from Caleb's office, which Henry had carried down the hall for her without being asked. She sat with both her hands on the head of her cane, and she watched the whole thing with the bright, fixed attention of a person who had wanted to see this exact ceremony for 14 years and was not going to miss a second of it. Fry was there with his wife and his 4 boys, the oldest of whom, the 12-year-old, stood at the back of the room in a clean shirt and would not take his eyes off Evelyn for the entire ceremony. Halfway through, he leaned over to his father and whispered something, and Fry whispered back, and the boy nodded once, very solemn, and went back to staring. Beulah Aldridge had not been invited. She came to the front gate of the ranch in her carriage 2 days before the wedding, and she sat in the carriage, and she sent her driver to the kitchen door with a small wrapped gift and a note. Mrs. Halloran took the note into Evelyn at the supper table. Evelyn read it. It was a short note. It said that Beulah understood she had not been included in the celebration, and that she accepted the omission as the natural consequence of her own conduct, and that she wished, all the same, to send her congratulations and a small token, and that she hoped one day to be received in the house again. Evelyn read it twice. She folded it. She handed it back to Mrs. Halloran. "Take the gift, Mrs. Halloran." "Yes, ma'am." "And tell her she is welcome at the New Year. For tea. Not before." "Yes, ma'am." "And Mrs. Halloran." "Yes, ma'am." "Do not tell her gently." Mrs. Halloran almost smiled. It was the closest thing to a smile Evelyn had ever seen on the housekeeper's face. "No, ma'am. I will not." After the ceremony, there was the supper Evelyn had asked for, at the long table, with every hand on the place at it. The doors of the dining room were thrown open, and the parlor doors too, and the men sat anywhere they wanted with their hats hanging from chair backs, and their elbows wherever they pleased. And Mrs. Halloran kept bringing platters out from the kitchen the way a general keeps sending reinforcements over a hill. Sam sat at her left. Henry sat at Caleb's right. Fry's 12-year-old sat between his father and Mrs. Mott, who had decided, on no evidence Evelyn could see, that the boy was going to be a lawyer someday, and who was already drilling him about Latin between the soup and the meat. Cora Aldridge sat across from Sam and made him talk. She made him talk more in 1 hour than he had talked in the previous 9 months, and at one point Evelyn heard him laugh, an actual laugh, which she had not known he could do. The men ate as if they had not eaten in years. They probably had not, the way she meant it. Caleb's father had built the house too big for the country, and Caleb had lived in it like a man counting empty rooms. And what Evelyn understood, sitting at the head of the long table with her new husband at the other end, and the noise of 40 people between them, was that the house had been waiting for this. The house had been built to be full. Caleb's father had built it for a woman who was not afraid of an empty room because she believed the rooms would one day not be empty, and she had died before she could see the proof of her own faith. And the house had stood empty in the meantime, and now it was full, and that was, in some small way that did not need to be said out loud, the end of a story that had been going on long before Evelyn Mercer had ever come up from Philadelphia. The winters that followed were hard, as Henry had said they would be. The first one took 2 of their best horses and a calf, and very nearly took a man named Wilkes, who got caught out on the North Range in a sudden blow and was found, half frozen, in a shallow gully 2 days later by Sam, who had ridden out alone against everyone's advice and brought him back across his saddle and refused to talk about it afterward. The second was easier. The third was the worst, with snow up to a horse's chest and the creek freezing solid to the gravel. But the bunkhouse was full by then, and there were men with families in the new extension, and the families helped each other, and nobody died, which was, by the standards of the country, an unalloyed victory. Evelyn took to ranching the way some women take to gardens, and some women take to children. She did not stop riding out with the men. She did, after the first year, stop riding out every day, because there was, by then, a great deal of paper to be done at the desk in the office that Caleb had once sat behind alone, and the paper went faster with 2 people. She kept the books. She read the contracts. She learned slowly and with many mistakes the law of water rights in the territory, which was an ugly and political subject in which she eventually came to understand as well as any lawyer in Cheyenne, and which saved them, twice, from neighbors who would have liked to divert the creek above their pasture. She wrote letters to other ranchers' wives in the territory, and after a while there was a kind of network of those letters that did not have a name and that, over the years, did a great deal of quiet work. When a homesteader's wife in the next county lost her husband and her ranch in the same week, it was Evelyn who arranged for her to come and stay at the Grayson place for the winter, and for her 3 children to be put in the new schoolhouse Caleb had built at the edge of the home pasture for the workers' children, and for the woman, in the spring, to be given a small piece of land at the eastern edge of the property at a price she could pay over 20 years. The woman wept on the porch when Evelyn handed her the paper. Evelyn did not tell her that the price had been set by Caleb at exactly 1 cent more than what they would have lost in taxes on the land if they had kept it. She did not have to. The woman knew. Out there, everybody eventually knew everything, and the knowing was, in the end, what held the country together. Mrs. Halloran lived to see 2 of the children. The first was a girl, born in the second spring, whom they named Hannah after Mrs. Mott, who came over from her own ranch with both her granddaughters when she heard, and who held the baby for an hour without speaking and handed her back to Evelyn with her face wet and her chin steady, and said, "She has your mother's hand, son," to Caleb, which made Caleb sit down hard on the porch step and put his face in his arms. The second was a boy, 2 years after, whom they named after Evelyn's father, although nobody outside the house ever knew that, because she had not told Caleb the whole story of her father, only the part about the barn, and her father had not been a man whose full name belonged in any history that was not strictly her own. Mrs. Halloran died in the winter after the boy was born. She died in her own room at the back of the house, in her own bed, with the door open to the kitchen so she could hear the kettle. She died with Evelyn holding her hand and Caleb standing in the doorway with his hat in both hands, and the last thing she said, very faint, was, "I told you I would stay." And Evelyn answered her, "You stayed, Mrs. Halloran. You stayed all the way through." And the housekeeper closed her eyes, and that was the end of it. They buried her under a cottonwood at the edge of the home pasture, in a place she had once pointed out to Evelyn, casually, in passing, the way she said everything, as having a nice view of the kitchen window. Sam dug the grave by himself. He would not let anyone help him. He dug it in 2 days through the half-frozen ground, and afterward he did not come up to the house for a week. And when he did come up, Evelyn made him sit at the kitchen table, and she made him eat a plate of food, and she did not speak to him while he ate, because Mrs. Halloran would not have. And he ate the whole plate and pushed it back and said, "Thank you, Mrs. Grayson," and got up and went back to the bunkhouse, and that was how that grief got carried. Cora Aldridge married a young man from the east of the territory 5 years after the wedding. He was a good man, a quiet man, who farmed wheat in a country where most people thought wheat was a fool's crop, and who turned out to be right about it within a decade. Beulah Aldridge did not live to see her daughter's children. She died of a long illness 2 years after Mrs. Halloran, in her own house in her own bed, attended by her own servants and a doctor she did not like, and she sent for Evelyn at the end. Evelyn went. She sat with the woman for the better part of an afternoon, and they talked about very little. The weather, a recipe, a cousin Beulah had been writing to in St. Louis. At the end, Beulah looked at her and said, "I did not understand you, Mrs. Grayson." And Evelyn said, "I know." And Beulah said, "I would have liked to." And Evelyn said, "I know that too." And that was as much honesty as the 2 of them had between them. And it was, in its own narrow way, enough. Henry married the girl Ruth from Missouri, eventually, although it took him 3 more years and 1 trip back east on a train. He brought her home to the ranch, and she turned out to be small and tough and red-haired and entirely undeceived about Henry, whom she loved on her own particular terms, and not a single one of his. They had 4 sons. The oldest worked the ranch under Sam, and then under Sam's nephew when Sam, finally, in his late 70s, sat down in the porch chair after supper one evening and did not get up again, and was found there in the morning by Hannah Grayson, who had come out to call him in for breakfast, and who at 13 years old was the first person in 3 generations to lay her hand on his and find it cold. There were more years. There were always more years on a ranch. The cattle bred and the men hired on and rode out and aged into other men's foremen, and the children grew into adults who knew, without being able to say how, the smell of a coming storm and the look of a sick calf and the right way to address a stranger at the kitchen door. The house, which had once been built too big for the country, was not big enough by the end. They added a wing in the 18th year and another in the 23rd, and Caleb walked through it sometimes at night with a lamp the way his father had walked through it counting the rooms. And the difference, Evelyn thought, watching him once from the doorway of the parlor, was that he was no longer counting what was missing. He was looking at what was there. She thought about that a great deal in the last years. She thought about it on a particular evening in their 29th year together, when they sat together on the porch, in the chairs they had sat in for so many evenings, that the boards beneath them had worn into a slight pale dip. The sun was going down over the western ridges the way it had on the night she had first seen the valley, with the same brassy color along the horizon, and the riders were coming in from the day's work, and Caleb's hair was almost all white now, and his hands lay on the arms of his chair the way an old man's hands lie, with the veins standing up and the knuckles a little bigger than they used to be. He turned his head to look at her. "Evelyn." "Yes?" "I have been thinking." "Dangerous." He laughed. He still had that laugh. It had been knocked loose the night at the office window, and it had never gone back to wherever it had been kept. "I have been thinking about what you said to me on the ridge. The first night." "I called you a son of a bitch on the ridge, Caleb." "You did. That was not the part I have been thinking about." "What part have you been thinking about?" He looked out at the valley. "You said it meant something to a woman who had lost everything to be told that nothing is what she was going to be offered, and to choose to take it anyway. You said that. I have thought about that sentence, I do not know how many times. I think more than any other sentence I have ever heard, and I have decided, finally, what I want to say about it. All right, it is a thing I have not been able to say for 30 years because I did not know how. I will say it now because I am old and my pride is shorter than it used to be." He paused. "What you did on that ridge when you took the nothing, when you decided, with your face wet, that you would come down to the house, that was the bravest thing I have ever seen any person do in this country, and I have seen a great many brave things. Braver than the line at the fire. Braver than Sam on the North Range with Wilkes across his saddle. Braver than any of it. Because the fire and the storm, those are things you do because if you do not do them, somebody dies. The thing on the ridge was a thing nobody made you do. You could have gone back to Philadelphia. You could have hated me forever from a boarding house room in a city. You chose, with no good reason on this earth, to come down to the house anyway. To give a stranger you had every right to despise one more day to be a person." He stopped. "And I have spent 29 years, Evelyn, trying to be the man you gave that day to." She did not answer for a long time. She did not answer because she was thinking about the boarding house room in Philadelphia, and the empty trunk on the floor of it, and the 17 letters tied with butcher's twine, and the way she had sat at the kitchen window one morning of that bad summer with her last cup of weak tea in her hand, and watched a woman across the street beat a rug on a line in the sun, and how she had thought, with a clarity she had not yet had a use for, "I will not die in this room. I will die somewhere else. I do not yet know where." She had not known on the ridge that she was choosing anything important. She had thought she was only choosing whether to sleep in a bed or in the grass. What she had learned in 29 years was that the important choices were almost always disguised, when you were making them, as small ones. The important choices wore the costumes of practical decisions. They presented themselves as questions about whether to come down off a ridge, or whether to put your hand into a black blistered hand in the dirt, or whether to invite a young woman in a dove-colored dress to come over on Thursdays for cake. The choices that mattered did not announce themselves. They never had. The ones that announced themselves, the grand and theatrical ones, the ones with witnesses and rings, those were just the public acknowledgement, much later, of the small private choices that had already, quietly, made themselves while nobody was watching. She had not been able to say that to herself, on the ridge. She could say it now. She reached across the small space between the two porch chairs, and she put her hand on his where it lay on the arm of his. "Caleb." "Yes." "I will tell you the thing I learned out here. I will tell you because you have given me your speech, and now I will give you mine. And it has taken me 30 years to write it, and I will not give it twice. All right. I came out here because I had lost everything, and I thought the only thing left to do with myself was to be useful to somebody who had less than I did. I came out here, as I see it now, to be brave at a small life. I thought a small life was all I had earned. And what I found out here is that I had the calculation backwards. The bravery is not in choosing the small life. The bravery is in believing, when you have every reason not to, that you are still worth being chosen for the right reasons. By another person or by yourself. The trick of it is that they are the same act. When I came down off the ridge to the house, Caleb, I was not choosing you. I was choosing me. I was choosing to believe that a woman who had been used and used and used was still, a person who could be looked at by another person and recognized. And I made that choice without knowing whether you were going to be able to do the recognizing. I made it as a wager, and the wager was not on you. The wager was on whether I was a woman who could still be wagered for. She squeezed his hand. And the thing I want to say, the thing I want you to know, is that I would make the wager again. I would make it tomorrow. I would make it in the dust at the crossroads with no letters in my pocket and no money in my purse and no place on this earth to go. I would make it because the wager itself was the thing that saved me. Not you, not the house, not the land, not even the fire. The choice to wager. That is the thing that saved me, Caleb. That is the thing I want our daughter to learn before I die, and our son too, and Fry's grandchildren, and Henry's, and every drifter who comes through the gate with a beat-up hat and asks for work. The thing that saved me was not being chosen. It was the willingness to be choosable. That is the only piece of advice I have to leave behind, and I am leaving it to you to pass on, because you will outlive me. The men in your family always outlive the women. I know it. I have known it for years. I am at peace with it. You will sit on this porch without me one day, and you will tell our grandchildren about a woman who came up the road on a stagecoach driver who would not bring her the last 6 miles. And what you will tell them is that the woman did not stop being a person on the trunk. That is the lesson. That is the only lesson I have. He did not answer. He could not answer. His face had done the thing his face had been doing in front of her for 30 years, the small, unrehearsed breaking he had once been so careful to hide, and which he had not, in their last decade together, hidden from her once. He turned his hand under hers and laced his fingers through her old, calloused, sun-spotted ones, and they sat like that on the porch in the brassy evening, 2 old people in chairs worn down by their own weight, while the riders came in across the home pasture and a thin column of smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney, and somewhere down by the corral, a granddaughter who had Hannah Grayson's voice and Caleb's straight back was calling impatiently for her brother to come help her with a fractious colt. The valley spread out beneath them in the last of the light. It was not the same valley she had ridden into in May, 29 years before. The cottonwoods along the creek were taller. The bunkhouse had become 3 bunkhouses. There were houses, real houses with whitewashed fences, where the new families lived, and a small wooden schoolhouse with a bell on top of it that rang every weekday morning at 8, and a graveyard, fenced and tended, where Mrs. Halloran lay under her cottonwood and Sam lay 2 rows over, and Mrs. Mott had insisted, before her own death, on being moved from her family plot in the next county and laid here as well, because she had said with her usual blunt economy, "That woman is going to need company up there, and I would like to be the one to give it to her." It was not the same valley. But it was, Evelyn thought, the valley she had been aiming at, without knowing it, the morning she walked away from the boarding house in Philadelphia. It was the valley that had been waiting for the woman who could stop being a passenger in her own story long enough to step down off a stagecoach in the middle of nothing and sit, with her hands folded over a valise, until somebody came. The sun went down behind the western ridges. Caleb's hand was warm in hers. The boards of the porch creaked a little in the cooling air, the way they always creaked. And somewhere a door opened and closed inside the house, and somebody, one of the grandchildren, maybe, or maybe Henry's wife, Ruth, who came up to the house on Thursdays the way Cora once had, was setting the table for supper. "Caleb." "Yes." "Come inside. They're calling us." "In a minute." "All right." They sat a minute longer. They sat the way they had earned the right to sit, after 30 years, on a porch they had built together in a country they had held together, with their hands joined and the long blue shadow of the cottonwood falling across their feet and the last of the sun catching, for one short second, on the glass of an upstairs window where a lamp had just been lit by a person they could not see. Then they got up slowly, the way old people get up, and they went inside.